Hello there, dear listener. We hope you're enjoying this lovely discussion. If you're not already aware, this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio, a Pan-African Nationalist and Garveyite network come to showcasing the rich and varied thoughts of African people. We have an exciting lineup of shows that we think you'll enjoy, including
the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
I think black people require too much buy-in. Like, we constantly have to sell black people on things that are beneficial to black people.
The Pro-Black Perspective Podcast.
I'm fearful that our people are not really studying how to get ahead, and we're kind of, continually staying behind.
The Harsh Reality Podcast.
To me, it don't matter. I think people are so dumbed down, it wouldn't matter what you reveal to them. They still are in the matrix. They're in the simulation. They're going to keep doing what they did at lemmings. So to me, it don't matter.
The Learning Curve Podcast.
Sexual access has never given you economic empowerment. The only person who has ever been economically empowered by a sexual relationship is the wasp and his woman.
The Cathedral Cheek Show.
When we start rising up to fight for our own, I guarantee you they'll stop doing what they're doing. I guarantee you they would have let that brother go. They was waiting to see what black folks was going to do.
Brother Bakari Podcast.
Black people love to claim folks that hate them, right? They're a slave master, and they are ashamed of who they really are.
The Forecast Radio.
Like, if you pray to the same deity as, like, your enemy, and that God blesses your enemy more than you may want to reconsider who you praying to,
And Tanzan, African Mind.
Africans generally are welcoming of everyone. Sometimes, to my consternation, I think that they should be less, welcoming.
If you love our podcast network, we would be grateful if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out our website at www.kwazradio.com for more information. Thank you for tuning in. And now, back to the program.
Peace, family. Kofi's here. Greetings to Kofi. We're going to switch this up today. Usually we talk about something original or whatever. But right now, I think I'm going to use this space maybe the next 2 months, it looks like, because this is a big book. But I'm going to use the space so that we could advance in our scholarship, in our reading. So this is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And I really think it's time for me to read this book. I don't like the title. I'll be upfront about that. I don't like the title, and I think, and I don't know what value this book will have for us. But this is a good brother. In fact, not just any good brother. This is a brother who, real revolutionary. Real Caribbean brother, goes out to Tanzania, and continues his revolutionary intellectual work. If that sounds familiar. You know what I'm saying? This is a brother from another mother. You know what I mean? So I'm going to get into this. This is a 1973 book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Now, I don't want to give Wazungu too much credit, but this brother seems like he's going to put some evidence forward. And so with that, I'm going to share with you guys. Now, the plan right now is to separate this into 8 parts. Because these chapters are actually pretty substantial, about 50 pages each. No, some of them are 100 pages, some of them are 50 pages, right? So chapters 1 and 2 are about 50 pages, and I think 3 too, but then 4 is about 100 pages, you could tell, and 5 is about 100 pages, and then 6 is probably another 50 pages. So, you have 6 chapters, 2 of them are 100 pages, you separate those 2 into 2 parts, therefore this is going to be part 1 of 8. And that's pretty much all we're going to say. It looks like there's a preface. So, it's not that long. It's only 2 pages. So, In that sense, what we're going to do is just going to jump right into it. And it's going to be a deep reading, a line-by-line reading type thing. If you haven't read this book, congratulations. You get to read it along with me. If you have read this book, congratulations. You know, you read it before me. But beyond that, let's get into it. And you guys could drop your comments. I'm using a new setup though. So I'm using a different computer. I'm using a computer that I can, like a mobile computer, so I can actually bring it to Africa with me. And so I'm just trying to set up things so that it can go smoothly. Because I don't know if you guys noticed, when I was in Africa, I started doing podcasts on my phone because I even though I had my mobile computer, I didn't set it up. And a part of the setting up was that I probably needed, like, you know, the streaming key that I had in America. Well, I didn't really need it. I could have got a new one, but you know, it is what it is. All right, so let's see. This book derives from a concern with the contemporary African situation. It delves into the past only because otherwise it would be impossible to understand how the present came into being and what the trends are for the near future. In the search for an understanding of what is now called underdevelopment in Africa, the limits of inquiry have had to be fixed as far apart as the 15th century on the one hand and the end of the colonial period on the other hand. Ideally, an analysis of underdevelopment should come even closer to the present than to the end of the colonial periods in the 1960s. The phenomenon of neocolonialism cries out for extensive investigation in order to formulate the strategy and tactics of American emancipation and development. The study does not go that far, but at least certain solutions are implicit in a correct historical evaluation, just as given medical remedies are indicated or indicated by a correct diagnosis of patient's conditions and on an accurate case history. I want to say before we continue, and this is what I'm going to do throughout the broadcast, so a lot of people might be like, hey, I'd rather just hear the book. Okay, then go buy an audiobook. You know, go put your money together and buy an audiobook. Like, I can't tell you anything else. But I'm stopping because I think it's critical for us to not just read words and hear words. I think it's critical for us to evaluate and understand words. So one of the things that I actually recently posted on my Twitter account, so you guys can check out the Twitter account. It's at Onitaset. One of the things I printed was, you know, Westerners, we Westernized Africans look at Africa as neo-colonial, like as entirely neo-colonial. We talk about neo-colonialism, and we say that from a perspective of being colonized ourselves. Now, granted, this is a Caribbean brother, so he's not talking from a neo-colonial perspective, or maybe he is, I don't know, but more or less, Africa generally is post-colonial. So the fact that he's writing in Dar es Salaam, he's writing in Tanzania, which was post-colonial, right? And that's critical. 1973 Tanzania is post-colonial. I feel like Nyerere was around at that point in time. That said, you know, this is a intellectual trap for a lot of us. This is an intellectual trap for a lot of us, and hopefully while we read this, we're going to see how and why. But I know this book has some interesting things in it, so, you know, we're going to get into it. So hopefully the facts and interpretations that follow will make a small contribution towards reinforcing the conclusion that African development is possible only on the basis of a radical break with the international capitalist system, which has been the principal agency of underdevelopment of Africa over the last 5 centuries. Now I think this is true. Right? Africa really should break away from the international capitalist system. Obviously. I think most people could agree to that. Babu, I actually read Babu recently. So anyway, so as the reader will observe, the question of development strategy is tackled briefly in the final section by A.M. Babu, former Minister of Economic Affairs and Development Planning, who has been actively involved in fashioning policy along those lines in the Tanzanian context. Not included in this reprint. Shit. Okay. It is no accident that the text as a whole has been written within Tanzania, where expressions of concern for development have been accompanied by considerably more positive action than in several other parts of the continent. You see? And that's what's critical about it, is that, again, you can't look at Africa as a monolith. And that's what we tend to do in the West. We say, hey, you know, Africa is in a neo-colonial. And it's like, no, Africa is 54 countries, each of them in different positions. Tanzania, actually, you know, the one that I chose, right? No coincidence, right? The one that I chose happens to be one of those countries that has considerably more positive action than several other parts of the continent. Because what we don't really grasp is that Africa is post-colonial. What post-colonial means is that African leadership, right, is autonomous. Now, what neocolonialism is that, hey, because I just read, for those of you guys who don't know, like I said, I just hot off the press on Twitter, we have a conversation about post-colonialism versus pre-colonialism, post-colonial versus neocolonialism, and I right just now, if you guys go check it out. Of course, those of you in the playback are going to be, it's not there anymore, but you might have to look in media and you'll see the image of neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah. But Kwame Nkrumah states very clearly, hey, you know what? Neocolonialism, like Ghana is not neocolonialism. What neocolonialism means is that a country is not non-aligned. Okay? A country is aligned with one of the superpowers during the Cold War. And when you're aligned with one of the superpowers during the Cold War, you were in fact a neo-colonial colony, because that alignment basically meant that you had one trading partner, right? But if you look at Africa today, it doesn't have one trading partner. What you have is African leaders who have multiple trading partners, mostly China, obviously, or Russia or America, but they have that freedom of choice. What we have to realize, though, is that is autonomy. That is autonomy. It's not the ideal version of autonomy, but even America has one of those. Well, America's not going to be a trading partner itself, but even America has one of those trading partners as its leading. Even Japan, even England, even France, even Ethiopia, even Korea, even so on and so forth. All of them have a limited set of trading partners, because obviously there's a limited set of productive countries and a limited set of countries that are willing to trade. But this sort of impact of trade on policy, on local policy, isn't as absolute as it would be in the quote unquote neocolonial setting. That's where this sort of rhetoric becomes dangerous. I do want to, I kind of do want to show off that post, just because. Only thing is, like I said, I'm using a new setup, so it's not going to be as easy as, it's not going to be that easy to pull it up. Let me just see if I can, yeah, because again, like I said, I'm using a different computer, so it's not, yeah. So I'm not even logged on to Twitter on this computer. Yeah, it's not gonna work. Let me see if I can, because I could also just look up myself. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, I think I can. So yeah, this would be pretty helpful. Hold on 2 seconds. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna look at this page very briefly. Oh shit. Just to give you guys some empathy, because I think the most important thing we can do is learn. The most important thing we could do is learn. So I'm using OBS Studio, so that means I have to change some things around. So let's see. This is gonna be. Let's see, what's this called? The internet? Yeah, browser. All right, so we're just gonna do browser window. Basically, what we're doing is we're just adding a new. We're just adding a new scene. That's how you do this stuff in let's see, browser. No, internet. All right, so. Whoopsie. Did not expect that to show. Where are we here? Okay. Yeah. I think that was okay. So that was my AI art, by the way. So it says, if colonial Africa had liberatory rhetoric that didn't involve literal decolonization, then it wasn't liberatory rhetoric. Yet most black liberatory rhetoric in Western nations is not decolonial, despite westernized Africans remaining colonized. It's no longer relatable. I realize, I tell you, I write at night, and then I think that it's clear. This is actually pretty damn, it's pretty damn heavy. Anyway, Africans in Africa are post-colonial. Africans in Western nations are colonial. Africans in Western nations, however, believe Africans in Africa are neo-colonial. Africans in Western nations are sources of confusion. I'd admit that even I once promoted confusion. So, you see, I say, realistically, Africa is post-colonial. So you have Nyerere, who's a capable intellectual leader, and then you have another leader of a different African country who might not be a capable intellectual leader. And then what happens is that you then say, oh, that incapable leader is a neo-colonialist, instead of that's just an incapable leader. You see what I'm saying? Because what you're doing is that you're pulling away and you're saying, oh, it's the white person, so Europe, underdeveloped Africa, as opposed to, hey, African people, like, not everybody's qualified to be a capable leader. And if you're, use the business example. If you have a business and then, it depends on who's leading the business, whether the business is going to be successful. Now, somebody else can come along and destroy and sabotage your business, but if you're not a capable leader, you don't say, oh, well, how this person, what you realize is that, hey, if you had a capable leader, the other person trying to sabotage your shit wouldn't necessarily sabotage your shit. I'm not saying it's absolute. So I did have two engagements. One is the sister in Ghana. She says Africans are neo-colonial, sir, and Nkrumah wrote documents on it. So I then have to pull out the documents, and we're going to go into that. And the other one's our brother Carl Hezekiah. He says, how are African nations post-colonial if their resources are still being stolen by the colonizers, right? And so, how are African nations post-colonial? And so, again, when we say stolen, what does that mean? So he says I say most people aren't living beside these resources, only from the outside looking in, right? As to say that we tend to look at Africa holistically as this, resource-rich pot, because that's how the Westerner looks at Africa. Like the Westerner looks at Africa as, oh, there's just billions of resources there, right? There's so many good resources there, as opposed to, how the average person in Africa might look at Africa, which is, oh, I was born here, right? So I said, Nkrumah is actually why I stopped saying Africa was neo-colonial. Not only did he give his diagnosis half a century ago, right, in the 1960s, he made it clear that only some states were neo-colonial, not all. He stated how non-alignment was a distinction. Many African nations are non-aligned now. So I say China, as some of the nation's largest trading partners, is evidence that neocolonialism isn't in effect. What's in effect is Western imperialist attempts, which are occasionally successful, but not a definitive sweeping judgment of Africa, as we Westernized Africans like to make of it. So the sister says this very example on buttresses my point. Let's see the documents that directly disproves that African states, whether some or all, aren't neocolonial. And I say, look, Nkrumah made the case that Ghana wasn't neocolonial during his reign. I also articulate the Westerners aren't the exclusive trading partners of many African nations today. The best example is South Africa being in BRICS. Africa in 1970 looked away, but in 2023, it doesn't, right? So, like the idea of South Africa being in BRICS kind of tells you, like in a consortium with Russia and China, if you will, right? And not as a subordinate per se, right? That kind of tells you all you need to know. Now, this is the book. You guys can check it out. But like mainly what I want to say is that Harry says non-alignment as practiced by Ghana and many other countries is based on cooperation with all states, whether they be capitalist, socialist, or have mixed economies. Such a policy, therefore, involves foreign investment from capitalist countries, so on and so forth. So he says, basically, neocolonialism, he's defining. He's like, the issue is not, basically, neocolonialism is that you would be aligned with the country, and that country would also not, you would not benefit from that alignment, right? So he says right here, the issue is not what returns the foreign investors receive on his investment, as to say, it's okay if the foreigner gets the investment. So you kind of see, based off of this, hey, the resources are stolen by the colonizers. It's like, yeah, it's okay if the colonizers, or it's okay if if your trading partner gets some sort of benefit, the only question is, do you get a benefit? Right? With its yeah, so it's like, do you get a benefit? So the issue is, he in fact do better for himself if he invested in a non-aligned country than if he invested in a neocolonial one. The question is one of the power. The state in the grip of neocolonialism is not the master of its own destiny. It's the factor of neocolonialism. So I do want you guys to probably explore this, because Kwame Nkrumah writes the book on neocolonialism. Literally. Like, this is literally Kwame Nkrumah, neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, right? So he literally writes the book on neocolonialism. So I definitely think you guys, if nothing else, you could look at these first 3 pages. But then that's where we get this context for this book, right? So let's just go into it. So he says, many colleagues and comrades shared in the preparation of this work. Special thanks must go to comrades Karim Hirji and Henru Mapulu of the University of Dar es Salaam. I was actually down there too. It's pretty impressive. Who read the manuscript in a spirit of constructive criticism, but contrary to the fashion in most prefaces, I will not add that all mistakes and shortcomings are entirely my responsibility. This is sheer bourgeois subjectivism. What the fuck? Okay. All right, we already get where this is going. Responsibility in matters of these sorts is always collective, especially with regards to the remedying of shortcomings. My thanks also go to the... What in the world? Like... I'm sorry, this is my brother from another mother, but like, the reason why you take credit for the mistakes is to not blame other people for the mistakes. But he's like, nah, you motherfuckers made some mistakes. Oh, he just didn't understand, I guess. I don't know. Many things also go to the Tanzanian Publishing House and the Bogo Louverture publication for cooperating in producing this volume as simply and cheaply as possible. The purpose has been try and reach Africans who wish to explore further the nature of the exploitation, rather than to satisfy the standards set by our oppressors and their spokesmen in the academic world. So that's pretty much the preface. Let me just see what the comments are like, if there are any comments. Actually, let me see if I'm even showing the screen. Yeah, good. I'm showing the screen. Let me try to minimize this thing. Oh, whoops. I'm not showing the screen. I'm showing the Firefox browser still, right? I think so. Yeah, I'm showing the Firefox browser still. So instead, what I need to do is go to this window. I need to go to this window. And then let's see what the comments are like. Kofi says we're seeing his Twitter. Bit of Medicine's here. Bit of Medicine says peace to everyone. And Kofi says greetings to Bit of Medicine. So shout out to everybody. I appreciate everybody coming through. This is going to be one of those, though, we were talking about what's popular, what's hip and what's not hip yesterday. And this is not hip. I'm not going to hold you guys. But it is what it is. You know what I mean? So chapter 1, some questions on development. In contrast with the surging growth of the countries in our socialist camp and the development taking place, albeit much more slowly. Actually, let me get my phone out. Sorry. In contrast with the surging growth of the country in our socialist camp and the development taking place, albeit much more slowly in the majority of capitalist countries, it is an unquestionable fact that a larger portion of the so-called underdeveloped countries are in total stagnation, and that in some of them the rate of economic growth is lower than that of population increase. These characteristics are not fortuitous. They correspond strictly to the nature of the capitalist system in full expansion, which transfers to the dependent countries the most abusive and barefaced forms of exploitation. It must be clearly understood that the only way to solve the questions now besetting mankind is to eliminate completely the exploitation of the dependent countries by developed capitalist countries, with all the consequences that this implies. So this is Che Guevara. And I want people to understand, this is Che Guevara, 1964, which is good. It must be clearly understood that why I want people to understand this is that this is what's appealing to us. This is appealing. This is appealing. In fact, this is not. I'm not gonna say this is appealing to me, but this right here, this statement right here, is indisputable. This, if you don't understand economics, it's appealing. If you don't understand economics, and the trouble with, I'll say black Westerners in particular, is that they are very ignorant. especially in economics. They're very, very ignorant. They are like, you have to realize that when you're a colonial subject, and this is the thing about the West, is the Westerners are colonial subjects. When you are a colonial subject, you are going to be financially stupid. You're going to be economically stupid. Like 9 times out of 10. Now, I said 9 times out of 10 yesterday, and I was called out like, damn, it's not 9 times out of 10. But you're going to be. And the thing with us as black people, as quote unquote African Americans, right? We have a habit of being economically stupid. Okay? This is where we have to I don't want to go too much, but like I'll try to rush the reading process into the future. But like I have to keep it real for you guys. In order that, like, we need a context for why I said what I said. Okay, we need a context for why I said what I said. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually just pivot a little bit to how do you do this? We're going to pivot a little bit to a really important quote in Malcolm X's autobiography. Okay? We're going to pivot a little bit to a really important quote. And I do this quote all the time, but some of you might not have caught it. Okay? Because we have to have a deep understanding of what the fuck is going on. Because if we don't, we're never going to get out of this. We're never going to succeed if we don't have a deep understanding. So although the book is here, I do want you guys to look at this. All right. So this is from Malcolm X's autobiography. This is page 210. Okay. Page 210 from the standard, I don't know what edition it is, but from the standard edition, page 210. He says, look, and it's very clear. This is it. Just the first paragraph. I was seeing in the real life the same point made in a joke that during the 1964 presidential campaign, Jet magazine reported that Senator Barry Goldwater had told somewhere. It was that a white man, a Negro, and a Jew were given one wish each. The white man asked for securities. The Negro asked for a lot of money. The Jew asked for some imitation jewelry and that colored boy's address. Okay? This is 1964. All right? This is 1964. Obviously, the joke is an old joke, so it's not like the Senator Barry Goldwater made it up. This is the guy who's probably running against Lyndon B. Johnson and he loses. But either way, he's a senator at the time, and he's like the joke is that black people are not financially literate. That's the joke. And so the financially literate response was the white man saying, I want security. Okay? The financially illiterate response was the Negro, the black African American, saying, I want some money. And the other financially illiterate response was the Jew who said, okay, let me get some imitation jewelry. And that guy's address. You see? And by the way, this right here, this document right here, I wrote this in 2012. I copied this thing in 2012. You guys can see. Sometimes after you get the philosophy, right? So I wrote a book called The Book of Power. Those of you who don't know, it's a philosophy book. After you get the philosophy, and I didn't do this after I got the philosophy, but regardless of what, a lot of us, I think I said this yesterday, right? I said it yesterday on Brother Bakari's program, so make sure you guys check out Brother Bakari too. But a lot of us get into consciousness reading Malcolm X. Okay? Or maybe I said this on the Shoot the Breeze. I don't remember. But we get into consciousness reading Malcolm X. Okay? So we don't know anything. We don't know anything. We're just, we go through a public fool system. We don't know anything. And then we start reading this magnificent, memory of African people in America, right? And then we go by it and we read a bunch of other stuff and, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes after you get from more philosophy, you circle back to see what was said. If you don't circle back to see what was said, you're going to miss some things. For instance, you don't know this, but he mentions the Buy Black movement in his autobiography. The Buy Black movement, he says the Buy Black movements of Harlem. The Buy Black movement is the Carlos Cooks movement. You don't really pick up on it, but well, now we do. We know this all today. But he tells you that in the autobiography, he tells you, oh yeah, my father was a Garveyite. Okay? Now, here's another part that I thought was really interesting. And I just want people to understand that this was a condition of African Americans. He said this really early on. Page 8, he's speaking as Malcolm Little. Back when I was growing up, the successful Lansing Negroes were such as waiters and boot blacks. The waiters and boot blacks were the successful African Americans, right? In Lansing, Michigan. He says, to be a janitor at some downtown store was to be highly respected. To be a janitor was to be highly respected. Okay? That's where, this is what desegregation was. And this is what segregation was like. It wasn't this, oh, you know, you have all these palaces and this is what segregation was. When you are in a colonial situation, right? When you are in a colonial situation, that's what you're dealing with. Let me just turn off this phone ringer because people like to think. So he says, to be the real elite, the big shots, the voices of the race were the waiters at the Lansing Country Club and the shoeshine boys at the state capitol. Those were the elites. You see what I'm saying? And we have to put this into the context of Africa, where who are the fucking elites? Who are the leaders of Africa? The big shots, who are freaking waiters. You know, I mean, if you look at Nigeria today, Tinubu was a fucking Chicago drug dealer. The president of Nigeria today was just a drug dealer 60 years ago. A street boy. Anyway, the only Negroes who really had any money were the ones in the numbers racket, gamblers, who ran the gambling house or who in some way lived parasitically off the poorest ones, who were the masses. Okay? Now, obviously the highlight is the end of the paragraph. But he says, no Negroes were hired then by the Lansing Big Oldsmobile plant or the Rio plant. Okay, do you remember the Rio? It was manufactured in Lansing, and the R.E. Olds, the man after whom it was named, also lived in Lansing. When the war came along, they hired some Negro janitors. So he says, look, this is what's really important. The bulk of the Negroes were either on welfare or WTPA, or they starved. This is the true story of segregation. Okay? But we have this other image. And if you guys remember, there's this other book I'm reading to you guys, Unity and Struggle by Cabral. Cabral is telling you, hey, a lot of people in Guinea were starving. A lot of people in Guinea were starving. So a lot of African Americans were starving before desegregation. And this is not me saying it. This is Malcolm X saying it. Just an FYI. And I'm not saying Malcolm X is some sort of authority. I'm just trying to put into context why like why we're talking about what we're talking about. But and you know, like I said, I really wanted you guys to see that. Let me just see what I could see how the comments are on the phone. There are no comments. So no, there's some comments. Forecast is here. He says, "What up, y'all?" So Forecast is here. So check this out. So anyway, so I said, so if you don't understand economics, you're going to say, hey, why is the economy not growing? The reality is this, that you get a lot of people together, the economy is not going to grow. Like the economy doesn't grow based off a lot of people getting together. The economy doesn't grow because you have more children. Okay? There's a way to grow the economy, and that's really what we don't talk about. Okay? There's a way to organize your community. That's what we don't really talk about. Like I said, the Book of Power does have that kind of rhetoric in it, so I appreciate it for that. But outside the Book of Power, it's really not that popular. Or you find out how to raise your economic standing in a colonial situation. So what we also have is that a lot of black people are talking about, oh, well, you could borrow money from the bank and this one and so forth. You know, a lot of strategies, like for instance, like one of the other books that has the word power, Blueprint for Black Power, you could learn how to probably make some money in America by, you know, telling the government of America, hey, I have this, there's a grant, I need a grant for this, I need to open this, I need to do that. That's all fine and good in a colonial situation. You see what I'm saying? But you don't have that colonial situation in Africa. You get what I'm saying? You don't have, oh yeah, well, I'll just get a scholarship to go to, I'll just get a scholarship to go to Harvard. You know, you don't have that because there's no Harvard there. You know what I'm saying? If you understand what I'm saying. So that's a thing. So, but again, this obviously is the case, but how to grow your economy, that's where the question comes in. And so we're going to see if this is explored in this book. And if it is, I'll let you know. If it isn't, I'll also let you know. So anyway, so let's go to it. What is development? So development in human society is a many-sided process. At the level of the individual, it implies increased skill and capacity, greater freedom, creativity, self-discipline, responsibility, and material well-being. Some of these are virtually moral categories and are difficult to evaluate, depending on as they do on the age in which one lives, one's class origins, and one's personal code on what is right and what is wrong. However, what is indisputable is that the achievement of any of those aspects of personal development is very much tied with the state of the society as a whole. From earliest times, man found it convenient and necessary to come together in groups to hunt and for the sake of survival. The relations which develop within any given social group are crucial to an understanding of the society as a whole. Freedom, responsibility, skill, etc. have real meaning only in terms of the relations of men in society. Of course, each social group comes into contact with others. And of course, I just want to give you, I mean, you guys get it. He's just going to give a breakdown this is giving a breakdown. This is the introduction. So you give it. So of course, each social group comes into contact with others. The relations between individuals in any two societies are regulated by the form of the two societies. Their respective political structures are important because the ruling elements within each group are the ones that begin to dialogue, trade, or fight, as the case might be. At the level of social groups, therefore, development implies an increasing capacity to regulate both internal and external relationships. Much of human history has been a fight for survival against natural hazards and against real and imagined human enemies. Development in the past has always meant the increase in the ability to guard the independence of the social group and indeed to infringe upon the freedom of others, something that often came about irrespective of the will of the persons within the societies evolved. So he's giving this interesting definition of development. So in this big definition of development, it's like it loses meaning. I mean, obviously, if you're saying development is freedom, right? Is greater freedom, is greater self-discipline. Like it's not too realistic. Yesterday on Shoot the Breeze, in fact, we were talking about this guy named Mizzy. Mizzy is this African. Actually, no, I don't know where he is, but he's this black guy in England, and he's just causing a ruckus all over. And his whole rationale is, well, I'm free. You know, I'm just being free. And so when you talk about what freedom, like what does freedom mean, really, and what is the limitation on freedom, really, right? Is like so one of the things he does is he sees some man standing on a crosswalk, and he just runs up and kind of just pushes him. Now, his attempt was to run up and jump over the guy's head, but you know, visually he's really just pushing the guy into the street. That's freedom. Just run up and push somebody into the street. But, you know what I mean? Right? Is that the kind of freedom that people need? Now, obviously, you know, you might say, well, look, we're talking in the context of Africa versus Europe and, you know, who should decide what Africa should do and all that kind of stuff. I get it. But again, if you make this broad definition of what freedom entails, and then it kind of, you know, all right. You know, it's kind of all right. Let's see. So Kofi says, listening to Show and getting a different view. Greetings. What's Show? Sorry. So men are not the only. I don't know what Show is. Let me just see if I could look at the comments while I'm thinking. Listening to Show. I don't know what Show is, but oh, maybe I'm missing some of the chat. No, I'm not missing some of the chat. So peace to Ish Kepri. But let's keep going. So men are not the only beings which operate in groups, but the human species embarked upon a unique line of development because man had the capacity to make and use tools. The very act of making tools was a stimulus to increased rationality rather than the consequence of a fully mature intellect. In historical terms, man, the worker, was every bit as important as man, the thinker, because the work with tools liberated men from sheer physical necessity so that he could impose himself upon other more powerful species and upon nature itself. The tools with which men work and the manner in which they organize their labor are both important indices of social development. More often than not, the term development is used in an exclusive economic sense, the justification being that the type of economy itself is an index of other social features. What then is economic development? A society develops economically as its members increase jointly their capacity for dealing with the environment. This capacity for dealing with the environment is dependent on the extent to which they understand the laws of nature, science, on the extent to which they put the understanding into practice by devising tools, technology, right? And on the manner in which work is organized. Taking a long-term view, it can be said that there has been constant economic development within human society since the origins of man, because man has multiplied enormously his capacity to win a living from nature. The magnitude of man's achievement is best understood by reflecting on the early history of human society and noting, firstly, the progress from crude stone tools to the use of metals, secondly, the changeover from hunting and gathering wild fruit to the domestication of animals and the growing of food crops, and thirdly, the improvement in the character of work from being an individualistic activity towards an activity which assumes a social character through the participation of many. Every people have shown a capacity for independently increasing their ability to live a more satisfactory life through exploiting the resources of nature. Every continent, I like that word exploiting, right? Every continent independently participated in the early epochs of the extension of man's control over his environment, which means in effect that every continent can point to a period of economic development. Africa, being the original home of man, was a major participant in the process in which the human groups displayed an ever-increasing capacity to extract a living from the natural environment. Indeed, in the early periods, Africa was the focus of the physical development of man as such, as distinct from other living beings. Now, again, I like the Africa focus, but it kind of like, I don't know why he's saying this. I feel like part of me is like, was he just saying this because, another part of me is whatever. So development was universal because the conditions leading each economic expansion were universal, right? Everywhere, man was faced with the task of survival by meeting fundamental material needs, and better tools were a consequence of the interplay between the human beings and nature as part of the struggle for survival. By the way, Kofi said it was a typo. Of course, human history is not a record of advances and nothing else. There were periods in every part of the world where there were temporary setbacks and actual reductions in the capacity to produce basic necessities and other services for the population. But the overall tendency was towards increased production, and at a given point in time, the increase in the quantity of goods was associated with the change in the quality of character of society. This will be shown later with reference to Africa. But to indicate the universal application of the principle of quantitative and qualitative change, an example will be drawn from China. Early man in China lived at the mercy of nature and slowly discovered such basic things as the fact that fire can be man-made and that seeds of some grasses could be planted in the soil to meet food requirements. These discoveries helped inhabitants of China to have simple farming communities using stone tools and producing enough for bare subsistence. This was achieved several thousand years before the birth of Christ or the flight of the Prophet Muhammad. The goods produced at that stage were divided more equally among the members of society who lived and worked in families. By the time of the Tang dynasty of the 7th century AD, China has expanded its economic capacity not only to grow more food, but also to manufacture a wide variety of items such as silk, porcelain, ships, and scientific devices. This, of course, presented a quantitative increase in the goods produced, and it was interrelated with qualitative changes in Chinese society. By the later date, there was a political state where before they were only self-government units. Instead of every family and every individual performing the task of agriculturalists, house builders, tailors, etc., there had arisen a specialization of function. Most of the population still tilled the land, but there were skilled artisans who made silk and porcelain, and bureaucrats who administered the state, and Buddhists and Confucians were religious philosophers who specialize in trying to explain those things that lay outside of immediate understanding. So I do like his writing style. It's really straight to the point. I don't know if it's a little too intellectual for the layperson, but for me, it's it's on level, right? Specialization and division of labor led to more production as well as inequality in distribution. Although I should say this, I don't know if it's too intellectual, and that's the problem, right? Because I realized, I looked at some of my writings, it's really intellectual, and that's a problem because you can't just send it to somebody and be like, hey, check this out. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna, like, especially the people in Tanzania who are not that good in English. It really it's really so these words right here that end in ION, they're called Latin words, and usually you're supposed to avoid using Latin words, okay? But you see this sentence has 4 of them, you know? Now, obviously for good reason, because you know, for good reason, because like how else are you gonna say it? But I'm just saying that those kind of words can really dull a reading for most people, whereas you know, obviously for us it might not be the case. So specialization and division of labor led to more production as well as inequality in distribution, right? So again, he comes up with this word inequality just randomly, right? And it's like, the thing is that you can't just make, like, this is what the socialists are going to do. They're going to just take this word, they're going to make something negative of something normal. You know, should the Buddhist and the skilled artisans make as much or as little as the agriculturalists? Or should everybody make the same, right? And it stands to reason that no, if not everybody's doing the same, it's like kind of like what the feminists say, equal pay for equal work, right? You're not doing equal work if you're an agriculturalist with a house builder, right? With a specialized house builder, with a specialized tailor, with a specialized silk artisan, you're not doing equal pay for equal work, right? Let's say if you're a skilled silk person, right? You're probably, I'll say it this way. I knew this sister in Uganda, right? And she was showing me how she would draw on, like how they would, like, embroidery. Yeah, she was showing me her embroidery. And then she showed me her aunt's embroidery. And, you know, her embroidery, I thought it was nice, you know. But anyway, according to her embroidery was closer to what you would expect from like you know, if you like how a kid draws, like how you would compare a kid's drawing towards let's say Stan Lee, you know, the comic book artist's drawing. I don't know if he drew his comic books, but let's say if he did, or like a comic book artist, you know, there's certain people, some people have more skill in drawing than other people, right? That said, the person who has more skill in drawing probably devoted a lot of time towards mastering drawing technique and studying drawing technique. And for that reason, you would pay them more than the person who has no drawing technique. Or you wouldn't even pay somebody who does no drawing technique to draw. Right? And that's something that we don't, like we don't really take into consideration when we talk about this whole inequality gambit. You know, I remember, for instance, I'll tell you guys this. In my experience in Tanzania, these women were cooking me food, right? Like I was living in their house, so they were like, hey, if you want, you know, you could pay us more money so that we can, you know, cook you breakfast and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, sure. I'm going to help out a black business. Why not? Right? So I help them out. I pay them money, whatever. And then later on, at some point, they come back and they say, hey, look, you know, if you were in America, you would pay 5 times as much for this food. So you should pay 5 times as much here. Right? And I looked around and I realized, if I were in America, I would not pay for this food. Because you have flies all over it. You know what I mean? Like there's flies all over the food. There's no seasoning. It's, you know, like it was not what you actually would eat if you were in America. You know, if you go into a restaurant in America and there's flies all over the food, you're not fucking paying for it. If anything, they're paying for it. Like you would sue them. And there's a joke in America like, ma'am, there's a fly in my soup, right? Or there's a joke in, I think, Europe where you would complain about one fly being in your soup or one fly being in your cup. Well, shit. If I only saw one fly, it was a good damn day. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't a day in that house particularly where I didn't see a plethora of flies. That said, when we talk about inequality, we have to come to terms with this idea that, you know, like what does that even mean? You know? So anyway, so inequality and distribution. So a small section of Chinese society came to take a large disproportionate share of the proceeds. See what I'm saying? Disproportionate share of the proceeds of human labor. And that was the section which did least to actually generate wealth by working in agriculture or industry. Now, again, this is where a lot of the socialists are, like he says this so matter-of-factly, this is where you F up. Okay? This is where you F up. And actually, this is where you go against our traditional African thought systems, and you go to this imaginary Wazungu system. In traditional Africa, the chief, the leader, does get more than the rest of the people. The chief does not do more work, okay, but they get more because they're the leader. You see what I'm saying? The chief does not, and I'm not, and again, this is not me saying it. This is why I think it's very important. This is why I like the fact that we're reading this book together. But I think it's very, very important for us to read more. And by read more, I mean get real accounts from real people. Real accounts from real people on the ground. And so I say that in order that I can show you guys, show you an example of a real example of us as a people. So let's see if I can find it. Okay, here it is. So we're gonna switch back to the internet. We're gonna go back to the ABS website. So that's another thing that you guys probably didn't realize, that I wrote this. I authored most of this website. So here you have the quotes from the Congo. Okay, again, this is not me. This is Fu Kiao. Okay, it's not me. I just transcribed it. This is Fu Kiao. Where is his name? Right here. So you pick up your book, African Cosmology of the Bantu Congo, Tying the Spiritual Knot, Principles of Living. This is Fu Kiao. Okay? It's not Oni. All right? And I did this in 2013, I guess. He has a list of proverbs, a list of quotes around the community, right? And some of them talk about the leader. And he says, look, the community leadership prevents problems and conflicts within the community. It is the responsibility of the community to create laws for its own members. Societal leaders move and act through the masses. A true leader mingles in the crowd. A leader that stands aloof, people of the puppet, whatever. When the community leadership loses direction, the community is oppressed. There's only the leadership and its direction that should be blamed in any social, economic, or political crisis. One spits only at the leader, right? Be a community teacher, leader, in order to know what goes on within the community. The real wisdom of society and its very basic needs are only known by those who mingle with the reality of the people's daily lives in society. And the community lacks the land, the door for survival. Its members will disperse. The community land availability to all members is a symbol of security and of togetherness within the community. A community leader, as well as a national one, must know that community natural land is the first property of the society that should be protected, even at the price of blood. A leader that sells or alienates the land of the community is a murderer because he prevents the community society from having access to its first source of all possibilities for survival. Now, pay attention to that, though, right here. And I was just going through all the leader quotes. I don't remember, because it's more of one of those things you have to interpret, right? So it says, any community leader must be aware that Kandagwa Bolungi principle in the community affairs. A community is a dog's head. Everybody who knocks upon it, one only spits the leader. A true leader is an object of critics, so on and so forth. Where the community Jin leadership is the center of the community. Societies like people have hearts. Okay, so I think this is probably the most relevant one. Oh wait, there was something about a puppet? What? I didn't see anything. What? How do you go back? A societal leader is the actor, the master. The true leader mingles in the crowd. A leader that stands aloof to his people is a puppet. So I think I already read that. So this is probably the most relevant one, right? The one about the land selling, right? The idea is this, and he outlines it, I think, further in the book, where actually the land is controlled by the leadership. So the leader does not have to work the land. Okay? He doesn't have to do more to work the land, but he's still getting compensation for organizing the whole system. And that's what people tend to ignore. Or they still get compensation not for necessarily working the land, but for having a particularly useful function in society that if it were not compensated for, then why would they do it? You know what I mean? Like if I'm the leader, if I'm organizing the community, and this is like a fair point for all of us, or I could even say this: when I got let's say you get a piece of property, right? You get a piece of property, right? You're sharing it with 3 other people, right? So 4 of you, right? Let me give you another number. 5 of you. Let's say you're sharing with 4 other people, 5 of you, right? Let's make it easy. 20% each, right? You get 5 of you get this property. You are the only person who is watching it and taking care of it and maintaining it, right? How should the profits be divided? Should it be divided equally among the 20% among of you, or should you, as the one who's actually maintaining the property, should you get more than the other people? And it becomes, well, if you shouldn't get more than other people, then why the fuck are you maintaining it? Why are you going in your pocket to maintain it? Or why are you doing all the heavy work, all the heavy lifting? Why? And that's what it comes to with the whole chief situation. If the chief is not better compensated, if the chief has to work as much as everybody else, then what's the point? What's the point? What's the point of being the chief? And that's the thing that the socialists do not grasp, or they refuse to admit that what they're actually asking for is a thing. Now I realize, I guess the comments are not on. What's going on? I don't see the comments. That's weird. I don't see all the comments. Let me see if I can. I don't like to fix this stuff on air, but let me see if I can fix it on air. Okay, here. I think that's it. Oh, cool. Home Alone's here. Home Alone's here. I don't know if it's in the way. It looks like it's in the way a little bit. I could probably fix that. I don't know if it's that. I don't know if you guys really care that it's in the way. Yeah, it's not that critical. You guys. I mean, if you're really reading along, you know. All right, so a small section of China's society came to take a large disproportionate share of the proceeds of human labor. And that was a section which did the least to actually generate wealth by working in agriculture or industry. Now, again, the people who are actually generating the wealth are the people who are organizing the situation. Okay? You cut a good deal. Like, that's what a CEO does. CEO cuts a good deal with, like if you're selling product, if you have a company that sells products, you creating the product does not generate the wealth. What generates the wealth is the CEO selling the product. Okay? You creating the product, like if you create a computer, if you don't sell the computer, there's no wealth. You get what I'm saying? There's no wealth. It's just, you kind of took the expenses, you created a computer, and then you created a computer, and it's just sitting there. What creates the wealth is doing the trade. And I think a lot of us don't grasp that, and then because we don't grasp that, it's like everything else kind of doesn't make any sense. Like the problem with desegregation, the problem, like if you don't grasp that, just like almost nothing else makes any sense, and you're just gonna be confused, and you're gonna be blaming the white man for everything, and it's like, well, sometimes you also have to realize, well, look, you're not, yeah, like I said about the Lansing situation, most people are going to be poor and starving if not for the if they're not trading. So he said they could afford to do so because grave inequalities had emerged in the ownership of the basic means of production, which was the land. Family land became smaller as far as most peasants were concerned, and a minority took over the greater portion of the land. Those changes in land tenure were part and parcel of development in its broadest sense. This is why development cannot be seen purely as an economic affair, but rather as an overall social process which is dependent upon the outcomes of man's efforts to deal with their natural environment. Through careful study, it is possible to comprehend some of the very complicated links. So it looks like he left China very quickly. Like, I don't even know why he went into China. He just like talked about it and then just like walked away from it really quickly. Like there was no conclusion there. It's just, okay, China has this, and then that's it. Then they got like, what? Why did you even go into China then? All right. So anyway, through careful study, it's possible to comprehend some of the very complicated links between the changes in the economic base and the changes in the rest of the superstructure of the society, including the sphere of ideology and social beliefs. The changeover from communalism in Asia and Europe led, for instance, to codes of behavior peculiar to feudalism. So the changeover from communalism in Asia and Europe led to instances to codes of behavior peculiar to feudalism. So, again, this right here is, again, socialist rhetoric. This is Marxism 101. How societies start from primitive communalism, primitive communism, to feudalism, to capitalism, to communism, right? It's not necessarily true. It's just an application of the Hegelian dialectic, blah, 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 blah. You guys get what I'm saying, right? Or you don't get what I'm saying, and that's fine, because it's just nonsense, right? So he says, the conduct of the European knights in armor had much in common with that of the Japanese samurais or warriors. They developed notions of so-called chivalry, conduct becoming a gentleman knight on horseback, while in contrast had to learn extreme humility, deference, and obsequiousness, symbolized by doffing his cap and standing bareheaded before his superiors. In Africa, too, it was to be found that the rise of the state and superior classes led to the practice whereby common subjects prostrated themselves in the presence of the monarchs and aristocrats. When the point had been reached, it became clear that the rough equality of the family had given way to a new state of society. In the natural science, it is well known that in many instances, quantitative change became qualitative after a certain period. The common example is the way that water can absorb heat, a quantitative process, until at 100 degrees Celsius it changes to steam, a qualitative change of form. Similarly, in human society, it has always been the case that the expansion of the economy leads eventually to a change in the form of social relations. Karl Marx, writing in the 19th century, was the first writer to appreciate this, and he distinguished within European history several stages of development. Now again, focus on European history. And the reason why I like Walter Rodney is he kind of stresses that, he's actually talking about Europe. But of course, why are we talking about it? I have no idea. Right? So he says the first major stage following after a simple band of hunters was communalism, where property was collectively owned, work was done in common, and goods were shared out equally. Now again, this is not true, because we showed you the Congo situation. The chief does own more. Okay? The chief owns more. And that's how it was. Now, you could make a case that is feudalism, but the trouble is that we of African descent, when we think of primitive communalism, we're thinking of the village setting. The village setting is the chief setting. Okay? It is like this whole thing of communalism, property was collective, like that probably, actually, yeah, I think that maybe this is the important word right here. This is for the simple band of hunters, right? Which has nothing to do with our ancestors. Well, not to say it doesn't do with our ancestors, but when you talk about pre-colonial Africa, you're not talking about a bunch of hunter-gatherers. You're actually talking about the feudalists. And that's where a lot of us are missing. We're talking about the feudalist situation when we're talking about the village situation. So it says the second was slavery, caused by the extension of domineering elements within the family and by some groups being overwhelmed by others. So the second was slavery, caused by the extension of domineering elements within the family and by some groups being overwhelmed by others. Slaves did a variety of tasks, but their main job was to produce food. So he's talking about Europe again, right? The next was feudalism, where agriculture remained the principal means of making a livelihood, but the land which was necessary for the purpose was in the hands of the few, and they took the lion's share of wealth. The workers on the land, now called serfs, were no longer the personal property of the masters, but they were tied to the land of a particular manor or estate. When the manor changed hands, the serfs had to remain there and provide goods for the landlord, just keeping enough to feed themselves. Just as the child of a slave was a slave, so the children of serfs were also serfs. So, I mean, look, even reading this description, somebody might look away and be like, you know what? I don't feel like that's the village situation. And that's okay. But that's the thing about this whole scheme, is that these do not really fit into the African paradigm. And the thing, like I said, Walter Rodney is going to point that out. So we're getting to that. But it's like, because these don't fit into the African paradigm, it stands to question why we continually have a debate about capitalism and communism in the African community, right? It stands to reason, why do we continue to do that? So let me see if there's still some comments. So Ish Kefri just said peace to Kofi. So it says, then came capitalism, under which the greatest wealth in the society was produced not in agriculture but by machines, in factories and in mines, right? So, which the greatest wealth in society was produced not in agriculture but by machines. Okay, again, capitalism is about industrialism. It doesn't make sense for African people to be talking about capitalism and socialism, because socialism is supposed to come after capitalism, and it's also about machines outproducing agriculture. But again, Africa, by and large, is largely agricultural, but by machines and factories and mines. Like the preceding phase of feudalism, capitalism was characterized by the concentration in a few hands of ownership of the means of producing wealth, and by unequal distribution of the products of human labor. The few who dominated were the bourgeoisie, who had originated in the merchants and craftsmen of the feudal epoch, and who rose to be industrialists and financiers. Meanwhile, the serfs were declared legally free to leave the land and to go in search of employment in capitalist enterprises. Their labor thereby became a commodity, something to be bought and sold. It was predicted that there would be a further stage, that of socialism, predicted, in which the principle of economic would be restored, as in communalism. In the present century, the phase of socialism has indeed emerged in some countries. Economically, each succeeding stage represented development in the strict sense that there were increased capacity to control the material environment and thereby to create more goods and services for the community, right? I want people to understand this. Socialism is the prediction. Marxism was a prediction. We're not talking about a real economic system, right, which you could say is capitalism, versus another real economic system. We're talking about a real economic system, or the caricature of a real economic system with a prediction. And this is why, like I said, I don't like to go into these sort of debates. I don't like to go into these sort of conversations, because it's like, it's science fiction. It's science fiction. So he says, economically, each succeeding stage represented development in the strict sense that there were increased capacity to control the material environment and thereby to create more goods and services for the community. The greater quantity of goods and services were based on greater skills and human inventiveness. Man was liberated in the sense of having more opportunities to display and develop his talent. Whether man uplifted himself in a moral sense is open to dispute. The advance in production increased the range of power which sections of society had over other sections, and it multiplied the violence which was part of the competition for survival and growth among social groups. It is not at all clear that a soldier serving capitalism in the last World War was less primitive in the elemental sense of the word than a soldier serving in one of Japan's feudal armies in the 16th century, or for the matter as a hunter living in the first phase of human organization in the forests of Brazil. Nevertheless, we do know that in these three respective epochs, hunting, band, feudalism, capitalism, the quality of life improved. It became less hazardous and less uncertain, and members of society potentially had greater choices over their destinies. All that is involved when the word development is used. So, what he's saying is this: capitalism actually gives you a less hazardous and less uncertain life, and greater choice of your destiny than the older economic systems. This is what he's saying. And this is the thing. When a black person says this, right? And I'm not saying that I'm saying this. What I'm saying is that I see, quote unquote black conservatives or black capitalists or whatever, they say this and there's a big pushback. How could my life have improved? How? No, blah, blah, blah. Oh no, life is worse now than it was ever before. But this is not me. This is not, Candace Owens or that guy. I got his brother on Discord who keeps quoting this okay guy or something like that, right? It's not me or one of these people. This is Walter Rodney saying, hey, look, we do know quality of life improved. Anyway, in the history of those societies which have passed through several modes of production, the opportunity is presented of seeing how quantitative changes give rise ultimately to an entirely different society. The key feature is that at given juncture, the social relations in the society were no longer effective in promoting advance. Indeed, they begin to act as brakes on the productive forces and therefore had to be discarded. Take, for instance, the epoch of slavery in Europe. However morally indefensible slavery may have been, it did serve for a while to open up the mines and agricultural plantations in larger parts of Europe, and notably within the Roman Empire. But then those peasants who remained free had their labor depressed and underutilized because of the presence of slaves. The slaves were not disposed to work at any task requiring skill, so the technological evolution of society threatened to come to a halt. Furthermore, the slaves were restless, and slave revolts were expensive to put down. The landowners, seeing their estate going to ruin, decided that it would be best to grant the legal freedom for which slaves were clamoring, and to keep exploiting the labor of their free serfs by ensuring that they had no land to plow other than those of the landlords. Thereby, a new set of social relations, that of landlord and serf, replaced the old relation of slave master and slave. In some instances, the changeover to a new mode was accompanied by violence at a critical point. This occurred when the ruling class involved were being threatened with removal by the process of change. The feudal landlords remained in power for centuries, during which the merchant and manufacturing interests grew wealthy and sought to achieve power and social preeminence. When classes are so well defined, their consciousness is at a high level. Both the landlord class and the capitalists recognized what was at stake. The former fought to hold on to the social relations which no longer correspond to the new technology of machine production and the organization of work by means of purchasing labor power. The capitalists flung themselves into revolution in Europe in the 18th and 19th century to break the old relations of production. So you see what he's saying, right? The notion of revolution in class consciousness must be borne in mind when it comes to examining the situation of the modern worker and peasant classes in Africa. However, for the greater part of Africa's history, the existing classes have been incompletely crystallized, and the change has been gradual rather than revolutionary. What is probably of more relevance for early African development is the principle that development over the world's territory has always been uneven. So he's like, again, he talks about Europe, and oh yeah, there's this revolution and this, that, so on and so forth, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you know what? This doesn't apply to Africa. Okay? And that's why that's why I said to myself, I want to come back and read this book, right? While all societies have experienced development, it is equally true that the rate of development differed from continent to continent. And within each continent, different parts increased their command over nature at different rates. Inside Africa, Egypt was capable of producing wealth in abundance 25 centuries ago because of mastery of many scientific natural laws and their invention of technology to irrigate, grow food, and extract minerals from the subsoil. At that time, hunting with bows and even wooden clubs was what people depended on for survival in most parts of the African continent and in various other places such as the British Isles. So he's talking about ancient Egypt was just leagues ahead of everybody. A lot of people in Africa, right? At one point, right? One of the most difficult questions to answer is exactly why different peoples developed at different rates when left on their own. Part of the answer lies in the environment in which human groups evolved, and part of it lies in the superstructure of human society. That is to say, as human beings battled with the material environment, they created forms of social relations, forms of government, patterns of behavior, and systems of belief, which together constituted the superstructure, which was never exactly the same in any two societies. Each element in the superstructure interacted with other elements in the superstructure as well as with the material base. For instance, the political and religious patterns affected each other and were often intertwined. The religious belief that a certain forest was sacred was the kind of element in the superstructure that affected economic activity, since the forest would not be cleared for cultivation. While in the final analysis, the breakthrough to a new stage of human development is dependent upon man's technical capacity to deal with the environment, it is also to be borne in mind that peculiarities in the superstructure of any given society have a marked impact on the rate of development. Cabral was talking about this in the other book where he's like, black people are doing guerrilla warfare. And in that guerrilla warfare, you have to hide in the forest. And some of them were like, oh, I'm not going to go in that forest. You know what I'm saying? Or the medicine man told me, or the spirit man told me, if I go in that forest, I'm going to die. So I'm not going to go in that forest, And so Cabral had to, get the spiritual leaders to be like, look, tell them the fucking forest is not hunted, But anyway, many observers have been puzzled by the fact that China never became capitalist. It entered the feudal phase of development virtually 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, and it developed many aspects of technology and had many craftsmen and artisans. Yet the mode of production was never transformed to one where machines were the main means of producing wealth and where the owners of capital would be the dominant class. The explanation is very complex, but in general terms, the main difference between feudal Europe and feudal China lay in the superstructure, i.e. in the body of beliefs, motivations, and socio-political institutions which derived from the material base, but in turn affected it. In China, religious, and you see, he's going to tell you, look, they didn't become capitalists. In China, religious, educational, and bureaucratic qualifications were of utmost importance, and government was in the hands of state officials rather than being run by the landlords of their own feudal estates. So, and this is something that we actually picked up on in that reading on Xi Jinping, where it was stated, they like qualifying for government, right? Qualifying for government is big in China. In Africa, it's not that big. In America, it's not that big. In Europe, it's not that big. In China, it's like you have this rigorous testing system. And it's actually a system that I think that we as African people should adopt. But that's a conversation for another time, right? Besides, there were, and of course, me even saying that, some people might be like, ew, we should not get anything from the Chinese. And I could see to that too. But I'm just saying that qualifying as a politician is actually it's something that is lacking in Africa, and because it's lacking in Africa today, at least, obviously, the chiefs were qualified individuals, but because it's lacking in Africa, like you have a lot of problems in Africa, and then we just say, oh, it's neocolonialism, instead of, you have unqualified leaders. But anyway, so besides, there were great egalitarian tendencies in Chinese land distribution, greater egalitarian tendencies in land distribution than in European land distribution, and the Chinese state owned a great deal of land. The consequence was that the landowners had greater powers as bureaucrats than as men of property, and they used them to keep social relations in the same mold. It would have been impossible for them to have done that indefinitely, but they slowed down the movement of history. In Europe, the elements of change were not stifled by the weight of state bureaucracy. Now you see, he's like, it would have been impossible for them. Again, you're going from the European mindset instead of like putting it from a Chinese mindset or an African mindset, right? As soon as the first capitalists appeared in European society, an incentive was created for further development through the attitude of this class. Never before in any human society had a group of people seeing themselves consciously functioning in order to make the maximum profit out of production. To fulfill their objective of acquiring more and more capital, capitalists took a great interest in the laws of science, which could be harnessed in the form of machinery to work and make profit on their behalf. At the political level, capitalism was also responsible for most of the features which today are referred to as Western democracy. In abolishing feudalism, the capitalists insisted on parliaments, constitutions, freedom of the press, etc. These two can be considered as development. However, the peasants and workers of Europe and eventually the inhabitants of the whole world paid a huge price so that the capitalists could make their profit from the human labor that always lies behind the machines. That contradicts, again, machines. That contradicts other facets of development, especially viewed from the standpoint of those who suffered and still suffer to make capitalist achievements possible. This latter group are the majority of mankind. To advance, they must overthrow capitalism. That is why at the moment of capitalism stands in the path of further human social development. To put it another way, the social class relations of capitalism are now outmoded, just as slave and feudal relations became outmoded in their time, right? So the latter groups are the majority of mankind. To advance, they must overthrow capitalism. So he's like, look, and this is where, again, this is the socialist follow. This is the trouble with. So I said, when you read something, you want to read fact versus interpretation. Okay, fact versus interpretation. So the fact that Malcolm X shared was, most people were poor. Or I guess the interpretation would have been that joke, but it was a joke, so it's okay, right? And jokes sometimes are based on fact. But you see what he's saying is he's like, look, the latter group are the majority of mankind. This is true. To advance, so in order to advance, they must overthrow capitalism. Okay? He just made that up. Now, not to say that you shouldn't overthrow capitalism. I'm just saying that he just made that up. But he's saying it so authoritatively that people are going to walk away from his book and be like, yeah, we got to overthrow capitalism, which is not necessarily the case. So to put it another way, the social class relations of capitalism are now outmoded, just as slave and feudal relations become outmoded in their time. So again, he's using this Hegelian dialectic, and by using this Hegelian dialectic, he's just making these authoritative statements on class or whatever, right? But it's missing the point. What I want to say is this: you don't want African people in Africa focused on overthrowing the economies of Europe. Okay? I'm not saying I want Europe to do whatever it's doing in Europe because they're still destroying the environment, but just let them get out of your country. It's like China is not trying to overthrow capitalism in America, right? Russia is not trying to overthrow capitalism in America, and these are both considered the central hubs or the central contenders of the central superpowers, central contenders of the global economy. They're not fighting in the Western nations. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, you know what? Just limit their boundaries. Just limit their boundaries, isolate them. Let them do whatever the fuck they want. Let them build their freaking factories next to each other. They will overthrow themselves. Okay? If America can't build factories, like if America can't build factories in Burkina Faso, right, and it can only build factories in Michigan, then the people in Michigan can complain. Okay? But otherwise, you see what I'm saying? So anyway, so there was a period where the capitalist system increased the well-being of significant numbers of people as a byproduct of seeking out profits for a few. But today, the quest for profits comes to a sharp conflict with people's demand that their material and social needs should be fulfilled. The capitalists, and so again, this like, what are you talking about? It's just like, what are you talking about? Of course, like again, the capitalist is still increasing the well-being of a significant number of people. The capitalist or bourgeoisie class is no longer capable of guiding the uninhibited development of science and technology, again, because these objectives now clash with the profit motive. Capitalism has proved incapable of transcending fundamental weaknesses such as underutilization of productive capacity, the persistence of a permanent sector of unemployed, and periodic economic crises related to the concept of market, which is concerned with people's ability to pay rather than their need for commodities. Capitalism has created its own irrationalities such as vicious white racism, tremendous waste associated with advertising, and the irrationality of incredible poverty in the midst of wealth and wastage even inside the biggest capitalist economies such as that of the USA. Above all, capitalism has intensified its own political contradictions in trying to subjugate nations and continents outside of Europe, so that workers and peasants in every part of the globe have become self-conscious and are determined to take their destiny into their own hands. So this determination is also an integral part of the process of development. So again, this is just socialist rhetoric at this point. Again, you find this on Marxist.org. It's like, okay. And it's like, it would be useful if you didn't buy into the garbage. Like if you didn't buy into the garbage. But when you buy into the garbage, like again, what is the message here? The message here is, hey, look at USA. We gotta overthrow capitalism in America. No, leave America alone. Like I said, there's a difference between African-centered and Africa-centered. This is America-centered. This is Europe-centered. How Europe underdeveloped Africa. Even the title of the book is Europe as the subject, and Africa as the object. Even that is Europe is the subject. That's the trouble. It's like, but again, this is my brother from another mother, Caribbean guy, goes to Tanzania, love it. But still, what is this? It can be offered as a generalization that all phases of development are temporary or transient, and are destined sooner or later to give way to something else. It is particularly important to stress this with reference to capitalism because the capitalist epoch is not quite over, and those who live at a particular point in time often fail to see that their way of life is in the process of transformation and elimination. So again, he's like, hey man, you guys don't see that. Like, he's trying to force a change. So basically, you study history and you say, oh look, development changes. And then it's like, okay, let's force it. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. And because that's not how it works, we have to stop anyway, because that's not how it works, we have to this should be borderline insanity. They fail to see that their life is in the process of transformation and elimination. Now again, he writes this in 1973. In 2023, just 50 years later, right, we're still in the same economy. Right? After he was assassinated and everything, he gave his life to this thing, and we're still in the same freaking economy. So what were you doing in your lifetime? Like, why was it so critical for you in your lifetime to advance this notion that to tell people, hey, you fail to see that your life is in the process of transformation and elimination. That's your failure. Your failure is that you don't see that. And then 50 years later, it's the same damn economy. So why should they have heeded your words, heeded your warnings? Again, that's the issue with the quote unquote socialists, is that they're bent on this prediction. They're bent on this prediction that doesn't even manifest. And it becomes a new type of religion, this second coming of Jesus, if you will. The second coming of Jesus, this return of the prophet. That doesn't happen. But it's like, hey, when this thing collapses, I'm gonna be in charge, No, you're not. That's not how it works, and you even said that's not how it works. Anyway, indeed, it is one of the functions that those who justify capitalism, bourgeois writers, to try and pretend that capitalism is here to stay. Now, again, it's not about it's here to stay, but again, if they were writing this 50 years ago, and it's still here 50 years, like of course, what are you talking about? A glance at the remarkable advance of socialism over the last 50-odd years will show that the apologists for capitalism are spokesmen of a social system that is rapidly expiring. Anyway, the fact that capitalism today is still around alongside of socialism should warn us that the modes of production cannot simply be viewed as a question of successive stages. Uneven development has always ensured that societies have come into contact when they were at different levels. For example, one that was communal and one that was capitalist. When two societies of different sorts come into prolonged and effective contact, the rate and character of change taking place in both is seriously affected by the extent to entirely new patterns are created. Two general rules can be observed to apply in such cases. Firstly, the weaker of the two societies, the one with less economic capacity, is bound to be adversely affected, and the bigger the gap between the two societies concerned, the more detrimental are the consequences. For example, when European capitalists come into contact with the indigenous hunting societies of America and the Caribbean, the latter were virtually exterminated. Secondly, assuming that the weaker society does survive, then ultimately it can resume its own independent development only if it proceeds to a level higher than that of the economy which had previously dominated it. The concrete instance of the operation of the second rule are found in the experience of the Soviet Union, China, and Korea. China and Korea were both at stages approximating to feudalism when they were colonized by the capitalist powers of Europe and Japan. Russia was never legally colonized, but while in the feudal stage and before its own indigenous capitalism could get very far, the Russian economy was subjugated by the more mature capitalism of Western Europe. In all three cases, it took a socialist revolution to break the domination of capitalism, and only the rapid tempo of socialist development could make amends for the period of subjugation when growth was misdirected and retarded. Indeed, as far as the two biggest socialist states are concerned, the Soviet Union and China, socialist development has already catapulted them beyond states such as Britain and France, which has been following the capitalist path for centuries, up to the end of the 1950s, the point at which the study terminates. So he's actually talking about the 1950s. So we're actually 80 years. Shit. Anyway. we're actually 70 years away, right? The point at which it terminates, Russia, China, Korea, and certain nations in Eastern Europe were the only countries which has decisively broken with capitalism and imperialism. Imperialism is itself a phase of capitalist development in which Western European capitalist countries, the USA and Japan, established political, economic, military, and cultural hegemony over other parts of the world, which were initially at a lower level and therefore could not resist domination. Imperialism was in effect the extended capitalist system, which for many years embraced the whole world, one part being the exploiters and the other the exploited, one part being dominated and the other acting as overlords, one part making policy and the other being dependent, right? So again, I am not anti-socialist per se. Like, I actually do like Russia and China. And maybe Korea, I don't know. Yeah, North Korea is pretty cool. So I'm not like what they do, what they accomplish in going against the imperialists is really impressive. Okay, you really should not be for the imperialists. You really should not be for. You really shouldn't be for the imperialists. But my whole position is not that, oh yeah, imperialism is good or some shit like that. You know what I mean? That's not what I would ever say. And I hope people understand that. Anyway, so let's keep going. So, and the other being dependent. So he says, socialism has advanced on imperialism's weakest flanks in the sector that is exploited, oppressed, and reduced to dependency. So socialism has advanced on imperialism's weakest flanks in the sectors that is being exploited, oppressed, and reduced to dependency. In Asia and Eastern Europe, socialism released the nationalist energies of colonized people. It turns... So again, what we have to realize is this. It's not about the economic system. It's about the nationalist energies. Okay? Because the thing is that another impressive country was Germany. And not just any Germany, Nazi Germany, obviously. Right? That was another impressive country that really rose up to the occasion of American domination. So what we have to understand is that China, Russia, Germany, Korea, these are examples of nationalist countries. You know, if you look at the rhetoric of China, put China first. If you look at even Russia, so Russia is very, 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 very important. So one of the things, like I said, I used to be familiar with socialists back in the day. The socialists would distinguish between the Trotskyists and the Stalinists. And they said, look, you know, the Stalinists would make a joke about the Trotskyists and say the Trotskyists were just looking for ass. You know what I mean? They were those guys, those conscious, you know, white guys pretty much, right? Who were just, you know, hippie love, let's fuck, you know, international unity, all that kind of stuff. Stalin was about getting Russia to be a fucking superpower. This is why even like Rwanda and Kagame, some people complain about him. I don't. Because that's another man who's a nationalist. I'm going to put Rwanda first. Now, some people might be taken aback. Hey, wait a second. Your Rwanda is kind of stepping on Congo a little bit. I could hear that. But again, you do want that sort of strong nationalism. You want that strong nationalist energy so that you could resist the fucking imperialists for your people. Now, you might be like, well, why can't we do it for every people? Well, you can't because that's not your nation. And that's something that we have to come to terms with. It's not our nation. If we were in the same national group, that would be a different story. Like Tanzania could advance, Tanganyika can advance Zanzibar, and they become Tanzania. Then they all work together. But because because Tanzania is not Mozambique, right? I'm pretty sure it's Mozambique that's at the border, right? It can't really do much for the Mozambique people. You have to, if you want this quote unquote African unity, you have to exercise it. But if you don't have it, you have to put your people first so that your people can be a fucking powerhouse, and then you could actually negotiate from a position of power. Because right now, if like let's say if I'm you know in Rwanda or something, I can't say like make policy good for the Congolese people, right? Because the Congolese people are under the quote unquote, you know, as they would say, you know, as you guys would say, the neocolonialism, you know? Like, if there were neocolonialist states, it would probably be the Congo. You know? There would be like a handful of them, and one of them would be the Congo. right? It wouldn't be Rwanda, it wouldn't be Tanzania, it wouldn't be Ghana, but Congo probably, DRC probably. But we all know this because Nkrumah wrote Challenge of the Congo too. A Challenge of the Congo too. So it's like, but anyway, I just wanted to clarify that nationalism is really what gets the people going forward. It's really what gets the people going forward, and not understanding that is what marks our failure in this sort of thing. By the way, appreciation for everybody who's sticking through, because this is actually really, reading takes a long time. I'm not gonna hold you, and me stopping every once in a while takes a long time too. So I appreciate everybody for coming through. And like if you guys are enjoying it, leave a comment or something. And I'll try to read it as soon as possible. But anyway, so let's keep going. By the way, do you guys think that I should have the text on the screen or not really? Because you guys aren't really typing, so it doesn't even matter. But it's just cool to see your text on screen, right? So anyway, it turned the goal of production away from the money market and towards the satisfaction of colonized. It turned the goal of production away from the money market and toward the satisfaction of human needs. It has eradicated bottlenecks such as permanent unemployment and periodic crises, and it has realized some of the promise implicit in Western or bourgeois democracy by providing the equality of economic condition which is necessary before one can make use of political equality and equality before the law. Now again, this is not entirely true that everything was fine and dandy. I can tell you guys this. Look up the word Potemkin village, and you'll see that the Soviet Union did put up fake villages in order to say, hey, look, we're doing pretty good. When in reality it's not. Like, again, economics is not that easy. It's really not that easy. So just this idea that this fantasy that, oh look, you could eradicate unemployment and crises and all that kind of stuff. And you could, provide the equality of economic conditions. Like, that's not true. It's not true by any stretch of the imagination. Still, what the Soviet Union did was so much better than what America did. What China's doing right now is so fucking good. What Russia's doing right now, really excellent, right? Still, don't buy into the propaganda that it's perfect. Like, humans, don't buy into, because then you think it's too damn easy when it's actually hard. And that's what I want people to understand. That's what I want people to get from me. It's actually pretty hard. That's why I'm writing the fucking books on it. I'm not writing the books because it's easy. I'm writing the books because it's difficult. And I want people to study. And a lot of the people who are in power are not studying. That's all I'm going to say. Right? Socialism has restated the economic quality of communalism, but communalism fell apart because of low economic productivity and scarcity. Socialism aims at and has significantly achieved the creation of plenty, that the principle of egalitarian distribution becomes consistent with the satisfaction of the wants of all members of society. So again, I think that when you have this, like, this is just proper. This is why I said you want to go by observation instead of interpretation. You want to go by observation instead of interpretation. If a white man tells you, hey, look, there's a shooting downtown, don't go, right? Don't go is the interpretation. The shooting downtown is the fact. Now, I'm not saying that you can't lie about a shooting downtown. But what I'm saying is that there are some things that are true. The trouble with this guy, Walter Rodney, is that it sounds like he did not go to Russia. Okay? He did not walk around Russia. When you and if he did go around Russia, he didn't go everywhere. Okay? And that's the trouble with a lot of us as African people. Now, I appreciate this brother for going to Dar es Salaam, and that's another thing to inform you too. That's another thing to inform you too. You saw early in the book, he said, hey, you know what? It's no coincidence I'm writing this in Dar es Salaam because things are pretty good here. If he never went to Dar es Salaam, you think he would have said things were good there? If he never went to Tanzania, you think he would have said any sort of praises for Africa? The trouble is that if you do not go somewhere, don't like you can talk about it, but don't act like you're an authority on it. I cannot be an authority on Rwanda. You don't hear me saying, hey, this is why Rwanda does. I haven't been to Rwanda. I'm not an authority on Israel. I'm not an authority on on Texas. I'm not an authority on England. I mean, I've been to England, but still, I'm not an authority on a lot of places. Even when I went to Tanzania, I could only talk to you about what was in Dar es Salaam, and I told you guys the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And the sexy. Anyway, but I know now I got people kind of trying to look at it. But anyway, but you can't like that. Like we have to realize that, like I said, the Soviet Union had the Potemkin villages. Okay, so it does not have this mass amount of economic equality. Okay, and achieve the creation of plenty. That is not true. Okay, that is not true. It's difficult. Okay, it is difficult. And when you realize that it's difficult, you begin to appreciate what efforts some African leaders are doing, and you realize that what's really holding us back is knowledge. And that's why, again, like I said, you open up those books. You open up the book of power. That's what you do. So I see Ish Kepri saying, hey, this is a great detailed coverage and in-depth analysis. Love it. Great work, bro. Oh, appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. I wasn't sure if people were going to like this, but I said to myself, I needed to read this book, and, I didn't really know what else to do. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. But yeah. I mean, I do want to show you guys this thing. I want to show you guys this Potemkin village, because it's starting to piss me off. Now, again, you might say, hey, look, Potemkin village, that's, that is a, that just might be propaganda too, right? Okay, if you insist, right? But again, the probability of this being propaganda is not there. It's not that good. Can you guys see this? I can't tell if you guys can see it because it looks like it's really small on my screen. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit, actually. So this is the word you guys want to look up. Potemkin village, right? Let me just double check to see if you guys can see this. Yeah, probably, right? So Potemkin village. In politics and economics, a Potemkin village, right, and this is in Russian, is a construction, literal or figurative, whose purpose is to provide an external facade to a situation to make people believe that the situation is better than it is. The term comes from the story of fake portable villages built by Georgy Potemkin, former lover of Empress, solely to impress the Empress during her journey to Crimea in 1781. Modern historians agree that the accounts of portable, so on and so forth. So actually, this is not the one that I wanted to. For some reason, when I first saw this, like a long time ago, they were talking about it in terms of the Soviet Union, but now they're talking about it in terms of, like that's the thing what happens with. I mean, I guess you could view history. That's the thing that happens with Wikipedia, is that at some point it's like it has this one message, and then it does no longer has that message. So you see, during the pandemic, the UK set up testing sites and blah blah blah. So let me see if it actually references the Soviet Union. So it doesn't. So in the Old West, the United States, Western. So this mostly is going to tell you about fake villages it looks like in the West, as opposed to when I originally saw it, which was fake villages inside of the. Oh wait, maybe here's what American historian has suggested: the Cold War Soviet Union practiced Potemkinism, building just enough capability to create the illusion of more. No. So I guess it's not. Yeah, I guess it's not here. Which sucks. Oh wait, visited a Soviet penal camp in 1944 and believed his Russian guide's stories that the prisoners were volunteers. No. Yeah, I guess they're not gonna show it, which sucks. Anyway, but basically, when I first came across this term, it was talking about how the Soviet Union had put up Potemkin villages during like world exhibitions and so on and so forth. But I guess they're not really. Yeah, I guess very president visited a Soviet penal camp and believed his Russian guide story that the prisoners were volunteers. That sucks. That actually sucks, because now it's like a little bit embarrassing, right? It's like I went through the trouble of actually bringing up the document, and then it's like, Oni, were you bullshitting? And it's like, shit, but that's what happens when they like edit the information. So Ish Kepri says it's legible. All right. So anyway, but basically the idea is that, as you guys could tell, even the West makes up Potemkin villages, right? Which is, but like even like if you look at rap music today, the rap music, like they show, like rappers' houses that are not their houses, like in music videos, and then like you see where they're really living, or you see like essentially it was said that like American artists aren't as rich as the African artists who actually don't have those bad deals. So they actually, when they're showing off money and showing off cars, they're their actual money and cars, as opposed to, like just rented props for whatever. Shit, right? But anyway, but like again, Soviet Union didn't have this widespread equality and all that stuff. But if you believe, that's the propaganda that they were showing. So they say one of the most crucial factors leading to more rapid and consistent expansion of economic capacity under socialism has been the implementation of planned development. So again, I think planned development is a good idea. I'm not going to hold you guys. So most of the historical processes so far described relate to involuntary and unplanned development. No one planned that at a given stage, human beings should cease using stone axes and use iron implements instead. And to come to more recent times, while individual capitalist firms plan their own expansion, their system is not geared to overall planning of the economy and the society. The capitalist state intervened only fitfully and partially to supervise capitalist development. A socialist state has as its prime function the control of the economy on behalf of the working class. The latter, i.e. workers and peasants, have now become the most dynamic force in human history and human development. To conclude this brief introduction to the extremely complex problem of social development, it is useful to recognize how inadequate are the explanation of the phenomenon which are provided by bourgeois scholars. They very seldom try to grapple with the issue in its totality, but rather concentrate attention narrowly on economic development. As defined by the average bourgeois economist, development becomes simply a matter of the combination of given factors of production, namely land, population, capital, technology, specialization, and large scale. Sorry. I was thinking about what I'm going to do after this book's finished, right? After I finish the whole series, right? As defined by the average bourgeois economist, development becomes simply a matter of the combination of a given factors of production, namely land, population, capital, technology, specialization, and large-scale production. These factors are indeed relevant, as is implied in the analysis so far, but omissions from the list of what bourgeois scholars think relevant are really overwhelming. No mention is made of the exploitation of the majority, which underlay all development prior to socialism. So again, he says exploitation of the majority, which underlay all development prior to socialism. So he's just saying inherently people are being underdeveloped, right? Being exploited, right? No mention is made of the social relations of production of classes. No mention is made of the way that the factors and relations of production combine to form a distinctive system or mode of production, varying from one historical epoch to another. No mention is made of imperialism as a logical phase of capitalism, right? So he's like, as much as the bourgeois scholars do not just say, hey, you know what? Imperialism is a part of capitalism. And look, I'm not saying it isn't. Okay, I'm not going to say that it isn't. So this is not, I'm not necessarily saying that everything this guy says is wrong, because that's not the case. It really comes to when you're comparing science fiction and propaganda to reality, right? Now, reality is that the capitalist countries are imperialist countries. That's the reality, right? But, as far as, is it real that people are being exploited? That's not necessarily the case. It's just that, like, if you believe that, all right, say it this way. I get a restaurant in Tanzania. That restaurant, I'm not going to work in Tanzania, obviously, right? I put in a lot of capital to get that restaurant. The people who are going to work for that restaurant are going to get money that they desperately need. Again, I'm not going to work in that restaurant, okay? Or if I do work in that restaurant, I'm probably not going to be the chef. Okay, but I put up a lot of capital. I bought a space. Coincidentally, I also did the graphic design for the for what the header looks like. So that's pretty cool. I did do something, right? Besides some invested capital, but like I didn't have to. I just happened to have that skill, right? I I might also make the menu, but regardless, the point is that like even if I did those artistic things, if I were to get paid for that, it would just be a one-time payment. It wouldn't be a continual payment. That's not the human labor. The point is this though. I put a lot of capital. I'm not going to work there. If I get more money than somebody who's working there, am I exploiting them? Right? And if you believe I'm exploiting them, then you're confusing why I fucking put my money there. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse, but it's like, come on. Like, it's a lot of freaking money. I put my money in there so that I can get a return on investment. So that I also could employ Tanzanian people. So I could also give Tanzanian people an opportunity to work and provide for their own families. But I put my money in so I could get my money back. Okay? That's why I put my money in there. Now, if you're going to say, well, Oni, you're an exploiter because you do the least amount of work, or you don't do as much work as the person who sweeps the floor, or as the person who does this, or the person who does that, that's fine for you to say that. But if in your society, I would not put any money into it. I would not invest a penny into a society where I do not get anything. No, I know. No, I'm not saying I wouldn't. I'm saying maybe some people would, but I probably wouldn't invest that much money. You know, and I could say that for sure in the sense of this. Give you guys an example. I have my Cash App on the bottom. You guys could just hit it up and say, here's some money. Well, except for you're getting a benefit from listening to this book, but let's say if I didn't even have the book, let's just say if I just put my Cash App, I didn't say anything. I just said, here's my Cash App, give me some money. You're not going to do that. Why? Because I'm not saying you wouldn't. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But how much money you put in is limited because you're like, well, what's the profit I'm going to get? Right? Whereas if I were a money market account and I said, hey, give me, I don't know, $10,000, you would say, sure, here's $10,000. And then there's no guarantee I'm going to give you back all of that or as much as you gave me. But you're still putting the money into the money market account because you feel, hey, you know what? I might get a profit. Now, for me, you'd say, here's $5. I don't care if I get a profit from that or not. Right? And that's fine. I understand that. But that's really what it comes down to when it comes to this exploitation thing. Right? Are you going to put a lot into something that doesn't profit you? And most of us say no. And this is why a lot of our black organizations do not get off the ground. Because a lot of us are not giving to these organizations because we're not going to give a lot to these organizations. The only time we give a lot to organizations is in the religious camp where we believe that we will be reborn into future whatever. But my point being, the larger point at hand is, the larger point at hand is hit up the Cash App. No, I'm joking. No, the larger point at hand is you can't call it exploitation just because the person's not doing that much work if the person voluntarily handed capital over to give people an opportunity to work. Okay? Because they should get their capital back. Or they're doing it in order to get their capital back or to get more than they invested. Otherwise, they just hold on to their money. You know what I mean? I don't know if everybody has $10,000 in the bank. I don't know, right? D-Web was saying yesterday, most people only have 600, right? Whatever. But the point is, you have 10,000, right? Are you going to just give it away? Right? Or are you giving it away with a purpose? You get what I'm saying? And that's really the question at hand. And so the capitalist says, hey, look, if I give away $10,000, it's because I want 12,000 or I want 20,000 or I want 100,000. Right? That's not exploitation. That's just intelligence. You know what I mean? Because otherwise you could just use your fucking $10,000. You know what I mean? Because why would you, you could just get a car. or something, or whatever you could get with $10,000. I don't know, but I don't have a car, so that's why I don't know. Anyway, so in contrast, any approach which tries to base itself on socialist and revolutionary principles must certainly introduce into discussion at the earliest possible point the concept of class, imperialism, and socialism, as well as the concepts of the workers and oppressed people. Each new concept bristles with its own complication, and it is not to be imagined that the mere resort to certain terminology is the answer to everything. However, one has to at least recognize the full human, historical, and social dimensions of development before it is feasible to consider underdevelopment or the strategies for escaping from underdevelopment. So I do want to just go here. Oppression. So I was listening to this brother. I gotta look up. I don't remember how to pronounce his name, but I'm looking at this brother. He's a cool brother. He's doing a book club, a book reading for Urugu. He just stopped. He just ended it. He just had his last episode. But one thing that was interesting was that he was talking about, so it's Eli Wanada, hashtag we are reading, right? What Wananda, he's a cool brother. So he's like, he's reading Urugu, and at some point during Urugu's reading, he's talking about Marimba Ani is like, oh, we're oppressed, and therefore, that's why we study Europe, because you can't get the liberation unless you know who's oppressing you, blah, 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 blah. And it's like that oppression notion. Again, it's one of those Western exports, or one of those Western imports into Africa, right? And because of that Western import into Africa, it does befuddle and confuse the whole conversation. Because just like I just said about the whole, hey, look, I bought a restaurant. Now, it wasn't $10,000, but still, if you guys are like, what the fuck kind of money do you got? I'm not giving this motherfucker nothing for Cash App. Anyway, but what I'm saying is this: I buy this restaurant in things. So I'm essentially the financier. I'm essentially going to, hopefully, I get a profit from investing in this. Chances are I might not. I'm not saying I like those chances. I would like the odds that I would get something. But, there are also odds that I won't get something. Like, for instance, with the restaurant, I was investing in that. With the bar, I invested in that. But then things kind of fell apart with the bar owner. And so, like, I'm not going to get a profit. And I wasn't really planning on getting a monetary profit. But, yeah, boy. All right. But anyway, but I'm just not going to get anything from that, right? Either way, and let's I don't care. Like, again, I'm okay with investing in businesses and not getting a profit. You know what I mean? I'm okay with sending money and not getting anything back, right? Either way, I mean, I'm okay when it's when it's voluntary on my part. When I get swindled, I'm not okay. But when I voluntarily give away money, it's okay, right? Either way, yeah. So now I give the money. I get the restaurant. The workers get a good piece of money. Am I oppressing them? No. Okay, am I oppressing them? No. Am I exploiting them? No. Are they volunteering their labor for my profit? Yes. And for both of our mutual profit? Yes. But am I exploiting them? No. Am I oppressing them? No. And that's what a lot of the socialists don't really grasp about the economics. So anyway, we're going to just try to wrap this up soon. So we go to what is underdevelopment. So having discussed development, it makes it easier to comprehend the concept of underdevelopment. Obviously, underdevelopment is not an absence of development because every people have developed into one way or another and to a greater or lesser extent. Underdevelopment makes sense only as a means of comparing levels of development. It is very much tied to the fact that human social development has been uneven, and from a strict economic viewpoint, some human groups have advanced further by producing more and becoming more wealthy. The moment that one group appears to be wealthier than others, some inquiry is bound to take place as to the reason for the difference. After Britain had begun to move ahead of the rest of Europe in the 18th century, the famous British economist Adam Smith felt it necessary to look into the causes behind the wealth of nations. At the same time, many Russians were very concerned about the fact that their country was backwards in comparison with England, France, and Germany in the 18th century and subsequently in the 19th century. Today, our main preoccupation is with the differences in wealth between On the one hand, Europe and North America, and on the other hand, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In comparison with the first, the second group can be said to be backwards or underdeveloped. At all times, therefore, one of the ideas behind underdevelopment is the comparative one. It is possible to compare the economic conditions at two different periods for the same country and determine whether or not it has developed. And more importantly, it's possible to compare the economies of any two countries or sets of countries at any given period in time. A second and even more indispensable. But again, just to summarize this, really, if we're talking about two different countries, we have to concede Europe and North America, particularly in the 1950s, outproduced many African nations, Asian nations, and Latin American nations. They outproduced them. Now, obviously, there's a reason. They had free labor and all blah blah blah. But they still, just on paper, you would expect them to in the international market be more ahead. Now, granted, it actually is the case that earlier in this period, Asia and Africa were richer than Europe, right? Not like this period per se, but like before that period, you had Mansa Musa, who's considered the richest person on the planet. The Empire of Mali, which was this huge kind of gold trading empire. You had China, in the Wealth of Nations that the guy mentioned. Adam Smith points out that China, India, and Egypt were the richest nations ever. Okay, so as to say that, you would have had that difference, but particularly when you talk about the 1950s, you're talking about a people like these people are making machines and actually tanks and bombs, and these people, particularly in Africa and Latin America, are not so much. China still had a competitive. China and Japan still had their advances, but most of the other nations didn't. And now it's like these other nations, these ones are actually collectively surpassing these ones. So you have BRIC versus the G8 or whatever. And actually France was actually asking BRIC whether they can join, which is like, what? Okay. Anyway, black people like to make a big deal out of that. So let me see what the comments are like. So it looks like Brother Bakari is here. Should Europe develop Africa? Is it really Europeans' responsibility to make sure we are developed? Exactly. And that was like that was the thing that I was thinking that this thing was going to be about. It looks like it might not be about that. But as much as it might be like, hey, Europe interrupted Africa's development, which is like everybody should know that, but like I mean, duh, like steal like a lot of us don't realize this, but Carlos Cook says it pretty clearly. And if you guys want the Carlos Cook's book, make sure you guys join the Discord. But Carlos Cook says it pretty clearly. He says, America, he said the European killed two races and killed off 2/3 of another. So he says they killed all the Native Americans, more or less, right? Like 95% of Native Americans, right? They killed 95% of the Australians. In fact, actually, I think there's no more pure. No, they said there's no more pure-blooded Tanzanians left. Tasmanians left. But still, like I don't know how much other people of Australia there were, but like he killed off pretty much 95% of Australia, and then he said they killed 66% of Africa. Okay, we tend to not realize that it's 66% that we're dead, but 66%. Now I don't know the figures for myself, obviously, but like you think of it like that, when you go to another country and you kill 66% of the population, shit's gonna be bad for them. Just like you kill off 95% of the Native Americans, we don't even talk about Native Americans. Like we're at a point where other people are pretending to be Native Americans. Like it's just that, and it's like maybe it's possible. You know what I mean? Like that's where we're at. Anyway, so Brother Bakari says we act like children when it comes to the rest of the world. But I mean, like again, Right, so it says a second and even more indispensable component of modern development is that it expresses a particular relationship of exploitation, namely the exploitation of one country by another. All the countries named as undeveloped in the world are exploited by others, and the undevelopment with which the world is now preoccupied is a product of capitalist, imperialist, and colonialist exploitation. African and Asian societies were developing independently until they were taken over directly or indirectly by the capitalist powers. When that happened, exploitation increased and the export of surplus ensued, depriving the societies of the benefit of their natural resources and labor. That is an integral part of undevelopment in the contemporary sense. So again, like we go back to the restaurant, right? And Brother Bakar, you could actually answer this, right? So if I buy a restaurant in Africa, and so basically I buy a restaurant, it costs me a bunch of money that the people in Africa do not have, right? Or the people in Africa are not willing to pay, right? But it's affordable for me. It's not affordable for them. Now, it's not, I'm not going to say it's $10,000, but let's just pretend it's $10,000. It's not $10,000, but let's just pretend so it's just easy for us to all understand. I take $10,000 out of my pocket, okay? And I say I want to buy a restaurant in Africa so I can employ the people there. They can have jobs, but when they make money, when they make enough money, I get some profit for myself, right? Is that exploitation? Okay? And so what happens is the socialist says this is exploitation and this is imperialism. If you take $10,000 out of your pocket in order to make a profit in another country and you export that profit, some of that profit, right, towards your own people or your own interest, right? So like, for instance, I take the money and I take it for myself. But again, if I were a European, I would take the money and bring it back to Europe and invest it in my own people in Europe, obviously. This is now called exploitation because you're, quote unquote, depriving the society of the benefit of their resources and labor, but you're not really paying attention to the fact that, hey, actually, I'm putting money there. Now, I'm not going to say that Europeans do not exploit African people. What I'm saying is that you don't want to make it a broad statement of economy, right? Or you don't want to take it out of the rationale or the logic of it. I.e., if I were a European, right, I wouldn't put, and it's not going to be $10,000 fucking dollars. It's going to be $20 million industry or $20 million machines into Africa and not pull out $400 million for myself. Okay? Why am I pulling out $400 million for myself? Because why the fuck did I put in $20 million machinery? It wasn't for you people. Now, see, me, I would obviously do it for the benefit of African people because I'm also an African, right? But the European is not an African. And instead of saying, hey, what, this is exploitation, just try to convince your people, well, look, we don't need your fucking machinery. We don't need your business. And that's it. Leave it at that. But otherwise, if you're saying, hey, look, and because even when we looked at Kwame Nkrumah, who is considered the anti-imperialist, who's considered the anti-neocolonialist, he said, hey, you know what? I think the capitalists would actually benefit more if they engaged in non-aligned states than if they engaged in neocolonial states. And he's like, I think that if they engaged with me as Ghana, they would benefit even more. So as to say that the whole purpose of the engagement is mutually beneficial, and what he's also articulating is that, you know, just looking at it as one society is benefit, but as the outside society benefiting is not what exploitation's about. But when you simplify it this way, it becomes an underdeveloped statement. You know what I'm saying? Like it clouds the judgment and it confuses people because it really then says, well, why in the world would somebody travel, 2,000 kilometers away from home if not to profit their family? You know? Brother Bakari says, if we truly wanted liberation, we would stop putting most of our energy on white folk. The rest of the energy is focused on fighting ourselves. Our energy would be focused on fixing us. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that a lot of us, it's like, hey, this guy's exploiting. Yeah, of course he's getting the surplus. Of course they would. If you put $20 million into a factory of course you want to somehow get $20 million back at least, but you don't just want $20 million back, because otherwise why would you fucking spend the $20 million? You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you? Because like I said to myself, look, like let's go back to the $10,000 example. Because again, you want to go into a range of money that's kind of high. You know, it's not high for everybody, but it's not low. You know, like it's low to Jay-Z, but it's not low for most of us, right? You could put $10,000 into a restaurant and get your $10,000 back, and say, look, I did my part, and then the rest of everybody else over there gets all their money. The trouble is this: you got nothing from that. You just lost your ability to use your money for a certain amount of time, and honestly, you probably helped to, like, you just lost your money. That's it. Like, you just lost your money and you got it back. That's it. That's not good. And what's interesting is that even in Africa, when I was talking about doing loans to people, they were saying, because I was thinking about doing loans and like making back 3 times as much or 2 times as much, and they were like, no, the way how we traditionally do the loan thing is that the person would get back as much money as they invested plus 10%. So the idea is that you would always get back as much as you invested plus an additional amount. Now, that's not that great in the long scheme of things. Although 10% investment is not that bad, it's not that good if you're trying to invest in a business. You know, like realistically, you would want more than 10%. Otherwise, like, what's the point? You could always just put 10% in the bank. You know, you can always get 10% from the bank. Not really, but still. You know, not these days. Back in the day, baby. But anyway, so in some quarters, it has often been thought wise to substitute the term developing for underdeveloped, right? One of the reasons for so doing is to avoid any unpleasantness which may be attached to the second term, which might be. It is often thought wise to substitute the term developing for underdeveloped. So we do say developing nations now. One of the reasons for doing so is to avoid any unpleasantness which may be attached to the second term, which might be interpreted as meaning underdeveloped mentally, physically, morally, or in any other respect. Actually, if underdevelopment were related to anything other than comparing economies, then the more underdeveloped country in the world would be the USA, which practices external oppression on a massive scale, while internally there is a blend of exploitation, brutality, and psychiatric disorder. Now, obviously, that's true, right? Psychiatric disorder, yeah. All right, I'm just joking. However, on the economic level, it is best to remain with the word underdeveloped rather than developing, because the latter creates the impression that all the countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America are escaping from a state of economic backwardness relative to the industrial nations of the world, and that they are emancipating themselves from the relationship of exploitation. That is certainly not true. Many undeveloped countries in Africa and elsewhere are becoming more underdeveloped in comparison with the world's greatest powers, because their exploitation by the metropoles is being intensified in new ways. Now, again, you're racing against some people who are way ahead of you, but okay. Economic comparisons can be made by looking at statistical tables or indices of what goods and services are produced and used in societies under discussion. Professional economists speak of the national income of countries and the national income per capita. These phrases have already become part of the layman's language by way of the newspaper, and no detailed explanations will be offered here. It is enough to note that the national income is the measurement of the total wealth of the country, while the per capita income is the figure obtained by dividing the national income by the number of inhabitants in order to get an idea of the average wealth of each inhabitant. This average can be misleading where there are great extremes of wealth. A young Ugandan put it in a very personal form when he said that the per capita income of his country camouflaged the fantastic difference between what was earned by his poor peasant father and what was earned by the biggest local capitalist, Madvani. In considering the question of development. Now, again, it depends on, like, you would have the Gini coefficient for this, which shows you how unequal a society is economically. But you'd also realize that this one guy, like, his wealth might not necessarily outnumber, because this is such a small number of people, like, it might not skew the general wealth in general. But again, another thing about it is this: why should the poor peasant have as much money as the local capitalist? Or, like, why should they be on equitable terms? In a sense of, let's say this poor peasant is just has a farm, there's just subsistence farming, right? So they're not even engaging in any kind of trade. Why would they have the same amount of money as the person who's engaging in international trade. You know, like I never looked up, I never heard of Madhvani, right? We could probably look him up, but you'll probably guess that he probably has tradings across the world, right? And so, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we can't look at Madhvani off the basis of what's going on today. Yeah, because he died. Oh, he died in 1958. Oh, he's an Indian guy too. Yeah. Okay. So, I misspelled his name. I'm going to show you guys it though, just for the thing. I'm going to show you guys this. So, I don't know if you guys can see it. It's kind of small, but my resolution, my screen resolution is like at 3900 or some shit like that. It's huge. But, so Madhvani says the group has investments in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, the Middle East, so on and so forth, right? You don't know if this is it, but then you go to this guy. So he's probably the originator, and you see he was born in India. So he's actually an Indian guy, and he died in Uganda in 1958. But you can kind of see, he emigrated, he started a business, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, he founded the Madhvani group, in fact. So, he's an entrepreneur, a businessman. He probably has sugar complexes, sugar works, and a South African brewery. He establishes the sugar estate, the breweries, and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, this guy is gonna be richer than somebody who just subsistence farms. You know? Now, I don't like the fact that he's Indian. I don't think you like it either. But again, started his business in Jinja. Oh, Jinja is another thing. Yeah. But of course, and now he has this group, Madhvani Group, which is the largest conglomerate in Uganda. So it's like, yeah, obviously, he's going to be wealthier than the average peasant. Now, whether you agree with some foreigner being the wealthier than an average peasant, you know, it's up to you. But that's just the case of that's just how the cookie crumbles, to say, right? You know what I mean? I think there might be too much text on the screen. But anyway, let's see. So let me see the comments. Bit of Medicine says, well stated, Bakari. Brother Bakari says, have you noticed that most of these people that always talk about what white people have done to us figure out a way to say a certain group of black people is the problem? A few examples, the Boule, the HBCUs, and the religious groups, anybody or any group that is black ends up being the problem. Yeah, you know, it's suddenly it's the black capitalist. You know what I mean? Suddenly it's the black capitalist or something. And it's like, what are you fucking talking about? You know? Like you're talking about, like what are you even talking about? Like even this guy right here, Madhvani, is not even a black guy. But for some reason, you know, he's suddenly made a Ugandan out of nowhere. But anyway, in considering the question of development away from the state of underdevelopment, it is of supreme importance to realize that such a process demands the removal of the gross inequalities of land distribution, property holding, and income, which are camouflaged behind national income figures. At one stage in history, advance was made at the cost of entrenching privileged groups. In our time, development has to mean advance which liquidates present privileged groups with their corresponding unprivileged groups. Nevertheless, the per capita income is a useful statistic for comparing one country with another, and the developed countries will all have per capita income several times higher than any of the recently independent African nations. Well, and again, for a reason, you know. But you see, he's like, look, like a lot of this is, oh, we got to get the land distribution and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, okay, come on. So the following table gives a clear picture of the gap between Africa and certain nations measured in per capita incomes. It is the gap that allows one group to be called developed and another underdeveloped. I kind of need to sit down, though. I've been standing for too long. The information is obtained from United Nations statistical publication and applies to a year 1968 unless otherwise stated. So he's like, Africa as a whole is a $1,400 per capita income. USA has a $3,500. But then, so Africa as a whole has this. Whereas some nations in Africa are very low. Like Congo is obviously super exploited. Ghana, which was free. Tanzania was only at 62, which is barely higher than Congo. Ghana was at 198. Like we underestimate it, but Kwame Nkrumah was a really good leader. Like he was a really good leader, all things considered. Anyway, so the gap that can be seen from the above evidence is not only great, but is also increasing. Many people have come to realize that the developed countries are growing richer quite rapidly, while undeveloped countries, for the most part, show stagnancy or slow rates of growth. In each country, a figure can be calculated to represent the rate at which the economy grows. The growth rate is highest in socialist countries, followed by the big capitalist countries, and with the colonies and ex-colonies trailing far behind. The proportion of international trade, which is in the hands of the undeveloped countries, is declining. The proportion was roughly 30% in 1938 and went down to less than 20% in the 1960s. And of course, it's going to be lower. But again, you have to question, what does international trade mean? And that's the thing that we don't really come to terms with. International trade is not an objective trade system. It is the Western trade system. You know, this is an important indicator because trade is both a reflection of the quantity of goods produced and a way of obtaining goods not locally produced. Developed economies have certain characteristics which contrast with undeveloped ones. The developed countries are all industrialized. That is to say, the greater part of their working population is engaged in industry rather than agriculture, and most of their wealth comes out of mines, factories, etc. They have a higher output of labor per man in industry because of their advanced technology and skills. You see what I'm saying? Again, this is what we're missing. We're missing the industrialization. But we're saying, why are we not growing as rich as they are? Well, this is it. Anyway, this is all known, but it's also striking that the developed countries have a much more advanced agriculture than the rest of the world. The agriculture has already become an industry, and the agricultural part of the economy produces more, although it is small. The countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America are called agricultural countries because they rely on agriculture and have little or no industry, but their agriculture is unscientific and the yields are far less than those of the developed countries. So this is the point. This is the point. And instead of saying, you know what, we as a people need to industrialize our agriculture, or we as a people need to apply more scientists and scientific knowledge towards our agricultural output, we're saying, ugh, why are these white boys ahead of us? Well, you just said. And this is what I was saying. We go back to the Malcolm X quote. And I think that was inside of that list of quotes I had, right? But you go into the Malcolm X quote, he says, anytime somebody's more successful than you, they're doing something you are not doing. Okay? Anytime somebody's more successful than you, they're doing something you are not doing. And so, unfortunately, some socialists believe, hey, the way how we would be successful is if we were to colonize other countries. No. Sure, but no, that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is industrialize your agriculture. Okay, that's the takeaway. And that's why Ghana was doing so well. Okay, I don't know what year this was. This is 1965. This is 1968, unless otherwise. But this is why Ghana was doing so well, because Ghana said we are going to industrialize our agriculture. So anyway, let's keep reading. In several of the largest undeveloped nations, there were stagnation and falls in agricultural output in and after 1966. In Africa, the output of food per person has been falling in recent years. Because the developed countries have a stronger industrial and agricultural economy than the rest of the world, they produce far more goods than the poor nations in the category of necessities as well as luxuries. It is possible to draw up statistical tables showing the production of grain, milk, steel, electrical power, paper, and wide range of other goods, and showing at the same time how much of each commodity is made available to each citizen on the average. Once again, the figures are highly favorable to a few privileged countries in the world. And this is why they are dominating the international trade. Because if they're producing more, then they will dominate the fucking trade. If you're producing more steel, right, and you're freely exchanging the steel internationally, right, then who will occupy the majority of the steel trade, of the international steel trade? The person who's producing more, the person producing less. And this is the point of it. So if you're looking at this international thing, you have to take into account, oh, well, yeah, obviously, if they're producing more, they will be more, they will trade more. Or they can trade more. It's not that they will trade more, but they can trade more. And because they can trade more and they do trade more, this is why this is what we see. So look, he's actually going to go into steel. So that's pretty good. The amount of steel used in a country is an excellent indicator of the level of industrialization. At one extreme, one finds that USA consumes 658 kilograms of steel per person, Sweden 623 kilograms, and East Germany 437 kilograms. On the other extreme, one finds that Zambia consumes 10 kilograms, East Africa 8 kilograms, Ethiopia 2 kilograms. When the same kind of calculation is made for sugar, a sample of the results shows Australia with 57 kilograms and North America and Soviet Union with 45 to 50 kilograms on average. Africa, however, consumes only 10 kilograms of sugar per person per year. This is better than Asia with 7 kilograms. So, again, there could they're producing more steel, they're consuming more steel, but you want to be like 50% of the, like why? Why would you? The question becomes, why would you be the predominant, the majority of international trade if you're not producing the most, you're not even consuming the most? Why would you be the majority of international trade? So he says, an even more gloomy set of statistics relates to basic food requirements. Each individual needs a certain quantity of food per day, measured in calories. The desirable amount is 3,000 calories per day, but no African country comes anywhere near to this figure. Algerians consume on average only 1,370 calories per day, while, I said that wrong, but it's okay. While Ivory Coast can consider itself very well off within an African context with 22, I don't know why I'm not saying this, 2,290 calories as the average, as the national average. Furthermore, one also has to judge the protein content of the food, and many parts of Africa suffer from protein famine, which means that even when calories are available from starchy foods, little protein is to be found. This is a typo right here. Persons in developed, and see, everybody makes typos. I made like one typo in my book, and people just, you make typos, But persons in developed capitalist and socialist countries consume twice as much protein food as those in undeveloped countries. Such differences help to make it clear which countries are developed and which are underdeveloped. So again, I wouldn't call it underdeveloped, because I think Americans also consume way too much fucking food, but it is what it is. The social services provided by a country are of importance equal to that of material production in bringing about human well-being and happiness. It is universally accepted that the state has a responsibility to establish schools and hospitals, but whether they are provided by the government or by private agencies, their numbers can be established in relation to the size of the population. The extent to which basic goods and social services are available in a country can also be measured indirectly by looking at the life expectancy, the frequency of deaths among children, the amount of malnutrition, the occurrence of diseases which would be prevented by inoculation in public health services, and the proportion of illiterates. In all these respects, the comparison between the developed and undeveloped countries shows huge and even frightening differences. For every 1,000 children who are born and live in Cameroon, 100 never live to see their first birthday. That's sad. And out of every 1,000 African children born alive in rural Sierra Leone, 160 die before reaching 1 year. Yet the comparable figure for the UK and Holland are only 12 and 18 respectively. Besides many more, but again, I'm not going to say I wouldn't blame Europe, but at the same time, I think as far as what development means, in the context of what's underdeveloped and what's developed, it's again, what is the economy here? Now, obviously, these economies are going to be the colonial structures, so, I could see where he's going, but to compare it to the UK and Holland, that's what I'm saying. I don't think that comparing it to the UK and Holland make it so that these countries are bad. And that's the thing that we tend to do. But again, it's more so the reason why UK and Holland have it is because of, their own medical advances and their own, whatever, as opposed to it's because they're holding you back. You know what I mean? But anyway, so he says, besides, many more African children die before they reach the age of 5. Lack of doctors and a major drawback. So a lot of the things that he's talking about are kind of Western inventions. Not to say that the Western invented schools or invented hospitals, or not to say that the Western invented inoculation, or that the Western invented public health services and all that kind of stuff, or the Western invented doctors and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that the Western invented those things, but the fact that there is a certain economic model that the West uses, and now this person is using in order to judge African nations, and that's where the false analysis comes in, because it's you're essentially making the European model the base form, and then saying, hey, this doesn't suit the European model, right? But it's yeah, but this is Africa. You get what I'm saying? So it's you would have illiterates. You know what I mean? Like in a large part of Africa, some of the people wouldn't have necessarily been illiterate regardless. You get what I'm saying? Just the same as when you talk about feudalism in Europe, a lot of people were illiterate. A lot of the peasants were illiterate. A lot of the peasants did not have access to doctors. A lot of the peasants did not, so on and so forth. So it's if you're talking about, Africa, again, it seems more like you're talking about the West than you're talking about Africa, But anyway, so he says in Italy, there's one doctor for every 580 Italians, and in Czechoslovakia, there's one doctor for every 510 citizens. In Niger, one doctor must do for 56,140 people. In Tunisia, one doctor for every 8,220 Tunisians, and in Chad, one doctor for 73,460 persons. It takes a large number of skilled people to make an industrial economy function, while the countries of Africa have a woefully insufficient number of highly qualified personnel. The figures on doctors just given confirms this. And the same problem exists with engineers, technicians, agriculturists, and even administrators and lawyers in some places. So again, this is all, again, I'm not saying that the Westerners created this stuff, but this is all a Western-based analysis. Okay? Engineers, technicians, agriculturalists, administrators, lawyers, like this guy thinks he's talking about Europe. You get what I'm saying? Like this is how you would judge a European country, not an African country. Not to say that Africa didn't have these sort of functionalities, but like again, like this is clearly you're talking about Africa. You're talking about Europe. And I don't know if you guys get what I'm saying when I say that. I don't know if you guys get what I'm saying when I say that, but it really is it really is that he's talking about Europe. Let me see what the comments are like. Brother McCarty says, facts, I forgot about the black capitalism. Yeah. Ish Kepri says, we must remember that in-depth analysis of the systems we exist in is a necessary part of our liberation and freedom. Content without context is symbols without substance. Let me read that again. We must remember that in-depth analysis of the systems we exist in is a necessary part. Yeah, exactly. We should look into our systems. But again, I think, and that's what I was saying. But I think that's the problem with this analysis that Rodney is given, is that it's like, it seems like he's like, I come to Africa and I'm not in Europe, and it's like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're not in Europe. That's the whole point. But anyway, so Brother McCarty says Europe is to blame and they are not going to fix it. We have to pull ourselves up or stay at the bottom. Yeah, exactly. Like that's the main, I like what Brother McCarty just said too. In the sense of that's the main point of it. Like, Europe's not going to fix it. Like, Europe is a problem, but it's like one thing we have to realize is that the other person is going to be a problem. Like, for instance, me going to Africa and investing money is a problem for somebody else. Like, somebody else has a dream of opening a restaurant. Foreign fucking, not bourgeoisie, but foreign investor says, hey, look, I'm going to open up my own restaurant, right? That's a problem for whoever has a restaurant there already. And if I come with my, like I was telling them, I was telling, my business partner, I was telling her, I said, there's this Chick-fil-A is a restaurant in America where I never been to Chick-fil-A. Well, I think I've been to it once, but I heard that Chick-fil-A has, good customer service where they're like, hey, thank you, how are you doing, and so forth. Now, my experience in Tanzania was that the customer service was almost universally bad, right? The food takes forever and all that kind of stuff, but the customer service was always universally bad. So I was telling my business partner, and when I go down to Africa, I'll probably give the people a better lecture in person, right? If I could speak Swahili. But I was telling them, look, you got to give people a good experience so they could come back. You got to tell them this, that, so forth, and I'm giving her the lessons I know from here, from America. That's going to give me, that should give me an edge or an advantage in Africa, right? But if it gives me an edge or an advantage in Africa, guess what? The other restaurants, they're going to see a loss in profit. Okay? So it's not my job to help the other businesses succeed as much as it's my job to help my business succeed. And that's what it comes down to. So this whole idea that, yes, if Europe comes in and says, hey, look, you people, you don't have to work on this. Oh, we're going to take your land. We're going to do all this shit. We're going to fuck you up. Yeah, they're supposed to. I'm not doing that. I'm not fucking people up. But, even so, they're supposed to. They're supposed to walk into somebody else's house and take shit. They're supposed to. If you want to keep your shit, you have to fucking shoot whoever's trying to get it. That's it. That's it. Anyway, let me just say that. Bit of medicine No. Sorry, Brother Bakari says African doctors leave the continent to get educated. They don't go back. Yeah, a lot of times they don't. But I think we talk about 1973. So I actually just don't understand what he means by, oh yeah, they don't have this, they don't have that, because it's like, well, why would they? I don't like. Why would they? Why would they have what it took America, a century to get? Why would they have that within the first 5 years of independence? Bit of Medicine says Africans have their way of doing things, though. No need for American programming. Oh, you mean about the thing? Well, I think the customer service. I think, like I'm saying, I think you could get an advantage for the customer service. And obviously, it's not like if it's not an advantage, then I wouldn't do it. But my whole thing is that what I'm saying basically is that I'm going to apply strategy, right? Whatever can work or whatever doesn't work, I'm going to be pragmatic, let's say, and I'm going to apply strategy in order for my business to do better than the business across the street. You get what I'm saying? And by making my business do better than the business across the street, the reality is this: the business across the street does suffer. But you don't come to me and say, oh, how an American immigrant underdeveloped, the African restaurants. No. It's not my responsibility to develop the other restaurant. It's my responsibility to get a return on my damn investment. That's what's my responsibility. And if I don't get a return on investment, that's fine. But the reality is that I put in an investment to get a return on investment. That's what I'm saying. And so Brother Bakari says the other restaurants will copy your style if they are smart. Yeah, exactly. And if they don't copy my style, then they just suffer, right? Speaking of which, my business partner is talking. Let's see. So the figures on doctors just given confirm this, and the same problem exists with engineers, technicians, administrators, and lawyers in some places, right? So again, you wouldn't have these stuff. But middle level skills in fields such as welding are also lacking. To make matters worse, there is a brain drain from Africa, Asia, and Latin America towards North America and Western Europe. This is to say professionals, technicians, higher level administrators, and skilled workers emigrate from their homes, and a small number of skilled people available to the undeveloped world are further depleted by the lure of better pay and opportunities in the developed world. The lopsided nature of the present international economy is strikingly brought home by the fact that the undeveloped countries have in turn to recruit foreign experts at fantastic cost. Yeah, and obviously, because why would a foreigner come to your country if not for profit? Right? Most of the data presented so far can be described as quantitative. It gives us measurement of the quantity of goods and services produced in various economies. In addition, certain qualitative assessments have to be made concerning the way that a given economy is put together. For economic development, it is not enough to produce more goods and services. The country has to produce more of those goods and services, which in turn will give rise spontaneously to future growth in the economy. For example, the food-producing sector must be flourishing so that workers would be healthy, and agriculture on the whole must be efficient so that the profits or savings from agriculture would stimulate industry. Heavy industries such as the steel industry and the production of electric power must be present so that one is capable of making machinery for other types of industry and for agriculture. Lack of heavy industry, inadequate production of food, and scientific agriculture, those are all characteristics of the undeveloped economy. So the answer is to invest in this sort of thing. But again, how do you invest in these sort of things? Like I said, I'm talking about a restaurant in Africa. It's not $10,000, but still $10,000 probably could get a good restaurant in Africa, right? That's the price range for a restaurant. For steel industry, for steel production, for electrical power, the cost is not something that most individuals, even in us Western individuals, can bear. And the only way to get to that is if you have a lot of wealth. Like if you have millions or 20 million, 10 million, 10 million, that's where you could start making production in electrical power. That's where you start making steel industry. If you don't have that, you're not. But that is what it would take to advance in Africa. And yet, like, if you want to combat these characteristics, you have to realize, who has that kind of money? There's only two people that have that kind of money, right? Those are the individual capitalists and the state. Okay, the individual capitalist and the state. But is the state, like, are the individual capitalists interested in the production of electrical power? That's the one question. And is the state interested in the production of electrical power? That's another. But like the question of, well, why doesn't Europe make us do this in production of electrical power? Because why? You know, why? Like why would they? Right? So Brother Bakari says, only you can get a return by getting paid to train the other businesses. Oh, that's another way too. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I need to have success. You know, I need to have success in order that I could actually be introduced. Like, hey, how could you do that? Or I can make other chains out of it. Like, I could buy other people's restaurants and then put my own branding on it. And then, you know, so on and so forth. But if I do all that kind of stuff, again, that's me incurring a cost. And I'm incurring this cost in order to get a return. And if I do not get a return, if I just start helping other people out, that's fine too. But the reality is this: I'm putting my energy. Like, for instance, if I need to fly to Africa, it's going to cost me $2,000 fucking dollars. Okay, it's going to cost me $2,000 to fly to Africa. And then if I fly to Africa, I also have to eat food while I'm there, right? What am I going to freaking eat? If I'm not looking out for my own profit, who's going to feed me? Where am I going to sleep? I gotta. If I fly to Africa, I'm gonna need to put my head on, you know, a bed, right? I have to put my head on the bed. Who's gonna provide a bed for me? Like, I could go out there and teach everybody how to do well businessly, right? I could go out there, fly out there at my own pocket, you know, buy my own rent, buy my own this, so on and so forth. I'm down $3,000, right? I'm eating food, and they're making how much money based off of the model that I'm teaching them, and you're saying that's the fair way? Okay, fine. You know what I mean? If that's what you call fair, I don't know if I would do that though. You know, I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it, but I also think that us demanding our people to just sacrifice everything to our own detriment, that is a problematic mindset. And there's only a handful of black people who will do that. You know, I'm not saying I wouldn't do that, because sure, you know, I'll be like, you know what? I mean, at least I got to be in Africa, right? But again, you know, like, I would actually prefer to get paid to teach people. You know, I prefer that over like teaching people for free. So it is, although that's what I'm doing now, right, guys? So it's not like I'm not used to that. Anyway, it is typical of underdeveloped economies that they do not or are not allowed to concentrate on those sectors of the economy which in turn will generate growth and raise production to a new level altogether. And there are very few ties between one sector and another, so that, say, agriculture and industry could react beneficially on each other. Now, again, he's like, look, you know, Europe is telling them not to. And that's the case sometimes, particularly with the World Trade Organization and all that kind of stuff. It's not a universal, but at the same time, the thing that we don't realize is that all of these things cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money. And so the socialists kind of look at it like, oh, you could do it. It's easy, right? When realistically, it's not that easy to do. Like, it really is not that easy to do. And that's why I think one of my favorite readings remains, and I read this for you guys, so you guys can check it out, you know, in between these podcasts. Ujamaa. So when you read Nyerere's writing, because Nyerere is actually the country that this guy is in, right? And Nyerere is saying, hey, you know what? We can't afford these machines. Like, we can't afford the machines. And that's where it really comes back. Like, we can't afford the factories. We can't afford the machines. Like, we could barely, like, we can't afford it, even as a state. And that's what a lot of the socialists do not understand. A lot of these economies cannot actually afford to industrialize yet. And we just say, why don't you industrialize yet? Why don't you industrialize? Come on, just industrialize, stupid. And it's like, yeah, okay. Can you industrialize? Why don't you industrialize? You know, like that's a big question. Why don't you industrialize? If industrialization is just so fucking easy, why don't you do it? You know, that's the big question of the day. Anyway, so I'm sorry for cursing so much. I know some of you probably want your children to hear this, but you know they need to. You know, yeah. So let's see. Brother McCarty says, you will not be sacrificing everything. Your eyes to see, your ears to hear. You will be more receptive of the ideas. See business and hear business, businessman. Yeah. No. I mean, I know what you're saying. I just I'm just saying I don't got money like that. You know what I'm saying? I don't have money like that. When I get my money up, of course, and that's what I'm saying. Like, there's this book right here. Matter of fact, so you got Sister Amma. She's a good sister. She's doing some good work in the field of Pan-Africanism. But she had a book club, and she was recommending this book right here, 10 Keys to Success in Agribusiness in Africa, right? And so what's interesting is that they mentioned somebody I never heard of. So I do want you guys to look into this brother, right? The book starts out, and you guys can't see it because I don't have the ebook. I actually bought this book for my my farming partner. I came back to America and I was like, let me get this book so that I could my farming partner could read it, right? But they said it starts off page 11 says I left the U.S. The chapter is I left the U.S. to come back in Africa to do agriculture, and I'm just gonna read the first page because I thought it was really interesting. Although you guys could see the text on the Discord, okay? But he says everything began during the leadership course we had at the P.K. Folcom Institute of Excellence in Yaoundé with its founder, the Cameroonian billionaire Dr. Paul K. Folcom. Despite his tight schedule, Dr. Folcom wanted, I don't know if he can still do that, to plant this crucial seed himself in the minds of the students. For him, leadership is a sum of essential, timely skills that must be unfolded to young Africans. And for me, it was an incredible opportunity to have him in front of us as a teacher. To tell the truth, I was more fascinated by the man and his success as a businessman than by the course itself. I came to understand through his reading that he has sworn to himself to become a leader in everything he will do, and he really had become one. I got so interested in the man that I searched for information on him, on his business, and his books. I was ready to pay any cost to know how he did it to become so wealthy. I read all his books. They were in the university library. Titles like And If Africa Awakes, Africa in 2050, and How Africans Worsen Their Misery. So again, You see how Walter Rodney writes how Europe underdeveloped Africa, but this billionaire writes how Africa worsened their misery, right? And so the guy continues and says, I highly recommend them to every young African. Just became my bedside books, right? So that's the first page. So you see the pages are kind of short too. But why I say that is because this is a billionaire. So this is a man who has his shit together. He has the wealth, and he goes to Africa to say, oh no, he's in Africa. He's an African, and we never heard of him, which is weird, right? I never heard of him. But he's a billionaire in Africa, and he has a leadership institute where he teaches people how to succeed. And part of the appeal, part of the allure of him teaching people was that he was already a billionaire. So I could actually do something similar. Like as Brother Bakari is saying, I could teach people how to be successful in business, but I have to first be successful in business myself, so I could teach them what I know, right? Because this billionaire does it, But if you're not successful in business, it's not really like you shouldn't be teaching, Like they say, those who can't do teach, and that shouldn't be the case. Realistically speaking, if you can do, then you should teach. If you're interested in advancing your people. But you should teach when you have a method perfected. That's what I would say. But anyway, that's all I would say to that. So furthermore, so I hope you guys like that. If you guys like that, drop a 1. I think it's an interesting looking book. Only trouble is that I do not have the ebook. So while I could read it to you guys, I don't have the ebook, so you guys can't read along. I would just read it. But anyway, so furthermore, whatever savings are made within the economy are mainly sent abroad or are frittered away in consumption rather than being redirected to productive purposes. So again, he's complaining about, and again, this is why I'm saying he's not African American, right? But this is something that the African Americans will complain about in regard to Africa, right? Which is, we complain about, oh, y'all consume rather than produce. But it's like we do the same thing in America. And I could go back to my brother from another mother, or my ancestor from another, I don't know. All right, never mind. But I don't know. But Jonathan Bruce was like, the problem is that we consume too much instead of producing. And so we knew that was a problem, but The reality is this, that it's hard to get, it's not as easy as, why don't you do this? Because you have to come to terms with the reality is that there's not really too many black groups that are doing it. And it really takes the hard work. So you have this guy right here, like I just mentioned. You have this guy who is a billionaire in Cameroon. We don't know about this guy. A billionaire in Cameroon. He goes into Cameroon and he teaches leadership to a bunch of other Cameroonian people, to the point where now you got this guy who writes the book, Loic Silicham, who gets 42 acres in Cameroon. You know, he gets 42 acres because he's like, you know what? I don't need to work in the billionaire inspires African people to be great. That's what we need to have. We need to have people who are inspiring people to be great, instead of just complaining about, oh, well, you see how black people ain't doing the right thing. Oh, they frittered away their consumption. Yeah, they frittered away the consumption. All of us are consuming. And we're not enough producing. You know, and it's hard to produce. Like I just told you, I had to part with a whole bunch of money just to get this restaurant, and I'm still, you know, and it's still not, you know, it didn't pay me yet. You know what I mean? But I lost the money. So anyway, so much of the national income which remains within the country goes to pay individuals who are not directly involved in producing wealth, but only in rendering auxiliary services, civil servants, merchants, soldiers, entertainers, etc. What aggregates, and see what I'm saying? He's like, oh, these people get paid. Yeah, of course they get paid. Soldiers are instrumental to the peacekeeping operation. Entertainers, maybe not so much, but you guys support these entertainers, right? Civil servants, civil servants are instrumental. Merchants, these are the people who are engaging in trade. That's where the wealth comes in, through the merchants. What do you? They're not the ones producing wealth. Like, what are you talking about? And that's the problem with this socialist mentality. And I know I'm sounding a little more agitated. I'm sounding a little more thing. But that's the problem with this socialist mentality, is that they do not realize, they don't recognize that these people are incredibly valuable. If you do not have soldiers, anybody could take your shit. Anybody could walk into your house and take all your fucking shit. Are you crazy? If you don't have civil servants, there's no fucking laws. There are no laws. You know, and you might say, hey man, everybody should just live by their own code. You can't in a large city. You need a civil service structure. Because you're no longer a part of a tribal group anymore. You know, the other day, I tell you, I was looking for this, somebody said something, I don't know, I was blah, 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 blah. I don't want to get the context. But I saw the video, again, of the school children, of the I don't know if it was college, it might have been college students, who stoned the other college student. Basically, there's this Christian girl said something bad about the Prophet Muhammad in northern Nigeria. So a bunch of men, and again, remember, this is a woman. A bunch of men killed her, basically just battered her with, chased her down, flung her to the ground, beat her with sticks, threw rocks at her till her skull broke, and then set her body on fire. And somebody even said, somebody even was like, I'm going to eat, I think he's, showing out how he's eating a piece of her. Right? They did this in Nigeria, a few months ago. If you don't have civil servants, if you don't have soldiers, that's the type of shit that could happen anywhere. That's the type of shit that can happen anywhere. So, this idea, oh man, these guys aren't producing wealth. No, you want these people to get some money. You want some sort of system that's telling people, hey, look, don't fucking stone somebody because they said some shit about your religion. You want soldiers to say, hey, look, back off of that lady or we're going to fucking gun you down because you're a fucking lunatic. If you don't have that, yeah, okay, you're at the mercy of, like right now inside of northern Nigeria, again, you have bands of people, they call them Boko Haram, which is basically the West is dangerous or something like that, or the West is stupid or something, I don't know what it is, but they're anti-Western or whatever, they're allegedly, but they're Boko Haram right now who are kidnapping children from schools, or shooting people, just doing all sorts of fuck shit in northern Nigeria. And you're saying, oh, these people. And now, if the Nigerian army is going to encounter the Boko Haram, and they're not really, because the president of Nigeria is a northern Nigerian, so they're not, whatever, right? But if the Nigerian army is coming to tow against this against this this terrorist group, right? You're gonna say, oh, they're not producing wealth. Like get out of here, man. Like you have to be serious. Now you could critique the entertainers. That's fine. But again, entertainers, like all of you are supporting the entertainers. So I don't know, like, what do you expect them not to be rich for? Shit. Sorry. Anyway, Brother Bakari says, we do the same ish all over the world. Exactly. Brother Bakari says, Oni, I've told you how to get paid. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying I need to be more productive. Otherwise, I'm not, you know? Brother Bakari says, we got Dr. Dre and P. Diddy. They are producers. LOL. Yeah, right? Shit. Somebody was like, yo, who do you think is the best producer among the black community? And I was like, oh, man, let me see. Don Gold, is it? And they're like, no, it's Timbaland. You're like, oh, okay, my fault. No, I'm joking. Anyway, what aggravates the situation is that more people are employed in those jobs than are really necessary to give efficient service. And to crown it all, these people do not reinvest in agriculture or industry. They squander their wealth created by the peasants and workers by purchasing cars, whiskey, and perfume. And I bet you this guy's smelling, well, no homo, but this guy's smelling good. Nah, that's not homo. I couldn't even say it in a non-homo way. But I'm saying, I bet you he has a car. I bet you he got perfume. I bet you he drink whiskey. Like, yeah, I mean, everybody's putting their wealth in whiskey, you know? But, you know, this is why I do want to. Like, again, you read Nyerere and you get a glimpse of good economic intelligence. Okay? You get it from Nyerere. You get it from Nyerere. From Nkrumah, you get revolutionary. I like Nkrumah. But I would say this. Adam Smith has his moments of good economic intelligence. Okay? Marcus Garvey, too. Marcus Garvey, you read Message to the People, you read Lesson 10. That should be what you do before a date. You know, like if you're talking to a new woman, you say, hey, read this for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what you do. But what I'm saying is this. There are, you know, Adam Smith outlines that there are two different types of people. Parsimonious and, I don't remember the other word. Prodigal. Prodigal is this. Squandering your wealth on cars, whiskey, and perfume. That's what's considered prodigal. Parsimonious is putting your wealth into, like, holding onto your wealth or putting your wealth into investments. Right? And what Adam Smith was outlining was that actually the key to economic development is more parsimonious people. So if you read Message to the People, Marcus Garvey is teaching you how to be parsimonious. Okay? Parsimonious, right? Basically, and so a thing that we, for instance, like what we tend to when I was younger, one of the jokes, anti-Semitism, well, not anti-Semitism, but you get what I'm saying. Making jokes about Jews was a little more popular, and one of the jokes that they made was that they were stingy. And of course, when I was younger, I was also considered stingy. In fact, some of the women I dated back in the day, especially, like before I started dating this African American woman from Texas, most people would call me stingy, right? But she taught me how to, I guess give her money. Not give her money, but simp a little more. And now I'm kind of like Captain Simp. But the whole point is this: that quality of being stingy, that sounds bad, and you make fun of Jews for being stingy. Realistically, that is actually the good quality. That is a good quality in order to acquire wealth. And it's no surprise that obviously the Jews are pretty wealthy. Now, obviously they do, shady things, shady deals and all that kind of stuff. But notwithstanding, being stingy or not squandering your wealth recklessly is a good quality for economic development. So what happens with this Walter Rodney critique now is that he's talking about, like, the capitalists are not generally are not universally squanderers of wealth, right? It's just that some people are and some people aren't. And what we have to realize is that the people who are squanderers of wealth oftentimes do end up poor. And they might be a part of the poor people anyway. Like the peasants also squander wealth. The workers also squander wealth. What a quality person might be is the parsimonious person. And that's the kind of quality that I want to express inside of my next book. But like I said, you could also just check out Marcus Garvey's Message to the People, Lesson 10, and you could do that. And I'm also trying to tell my son to read it, but it's not like he really understands it because he's kind of young. But anyway, Brother Carr says, but we don't build skyscrapers and hospitals. We don't build roads, but we, FBA, invented rap, LOL. Yeah. And I'd say rap these days, oh my gosh. But of course, tomorrow we're gonna say, we invented TikTok rap, right? Oh man, I was listening to this track this lady was saying. Oh my gosh, it was so bad. It was so bad that I realized if I had just waited a couple of years, I could have been a rapper. I could have been a rapper. But anyway, so it's been noted with irony that the principal industry of many undeveloped countries is administration. So again, I could see how this is a problem, but it's also the trouble of, well, you don't have industry, so what do you expect? Not long ago, 60% of internal revenue of Dahomey went into paying salaries of civil servants and government leaders. The Dahomey? What the fuck? I didn't even know that was a country. Wait, so the salaries given to the elected politicians is higher than that given to the British members of parliament, and the number of parliamentarians in the underdeveloped African countries is also relatively high. In Gabon, there is one parliamentary representative for every 6,000 inhabitants, compared to one French parliamentary representative for every 100,000 Frenchmen. Many more figures of that sort indicate that in describing a typical undeveloped economy, it is essential to point out the high disproportion of the locally distributed wealth that goes into the pockets of a privileged few. So again, it really just seems like he's comparing 400 years of history in France or in America towards 10 years of history, of administrative history or governmental history of national history in Africa. Okay? Like I think that's the big problem. Like you're comparing oranges and apples and oranges. You're comparing apples and oranges, and it's like, yeah, well, France had an organic development from like 17, from the time of from before Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, so before that time, France was a country, right? Gabon, right, was not a country before, during that time. Gabon at that time had a host of African kingdoms that are gone, right? So all that administrative experience is gone, and what it does is that it inherits a colony, right? It inherits a colony with no colonial or national experience to really speak about, right? So like the idea that they should like if you went from Gabon to France, you should not see a difference. Like that's just unrealistic. It's just unrealistic and it's dismissive, and it's just a really bad comparison. But of course, this is I don't know. I hope people see what I'm trying to say. Brett Bakari is joking. Free Lil Boosie and free Young Thug. Anyway, so privileged few. So members of the privileged groups inside Africa always defend themselves by saying that they pay the taxes which keep the government going. At face value, the statement sounds reasonable, but on close examination is really the most absurd argument that shows total ignorance of how the economy functions. Taxes do not produce national wealth and development. Wealth has to be produced out of nature from tilling the land or mining metals or felling trees or turning raw materials into finished products for human consumption. These things are done by the vast majority of the population who are peasants and workers. There would be no income tax if the laboring population did not work. So again, this is, I think what he's doing, what this critique that he's giving is actually unrealistic. I know I don't want to keep interrupting him, but that's the trouble. It's like you go to Africa. All right, so when you go to Africa, and he should have seen this when he was in Tanzania, but when you go to Africa, you realize most African people in the city of Dar es Salaam are not tilling land, are not mining minerals, are not felling trees, are not turning raw materials into finished products. A lot of the young black people were just driving people around. Okay? They were doing this boda, dollar, Uber. They were basically Uber, right? They were just doing that. That was most of the people. Now, you do have a lot of stores, and a lot of people were manning those stores. But, again, the stores is just exchanging goods between people, right? That is not any of these things that he's saying. So it becomes... Well, it really becomes that if you simplify the economy towards this sort of activity, you realize that a very small number of people are doing this, or they're not doing this in the cities. Okay? And because they're not doing this in the cities, but at the same time, the cities are where you would engage in international trade. Okay, and the cities are where the majority of people are living, or the highest density of people are living, right? And because of that, a lot of the resources of the state are going to be focused on the cities, and where the development will naturally happen. Because like what happens is this: even if you said, hey, you know what, the farmers are doing all the stuff or whatever, right? Like even if you thought that, let's say you're talking about bringing internet to Africa, right? If you bring internet out to the farmlands or whatever, like 100 people are going to get the internet versus 10,000 people if you bring it out to the cities. Or if you're trying to build a road, 100 people will use the road versus 10,000 people will use the road. So it really comes back to, you're going to, like, you have this dichotomy between the city and the countryside. And again, like I said, you want to revisit Adam Smith for that. I'm thinking I might write a abridged version for Adam Smith, but like you really have to come to terms with, hey, you know what? Like this idea that the vast majority of population are peasants and workers, like that's not going to be, like, that's not actually the case. Like this is not the case. Like it's not the case. No, I mean, it's possible if you look at it from the whole national perspective, but if you're looking at it from the city perspective, right? And remember, the city is where the government is located, right? If you look at it from the city perspective, it is not the case that the majority of the population are peasants or workers. Okay, it's not. Anyway, like a lot of people can't even find jobs because there's like you there's a lot of workers in America because America is a developed industrial economy. It's not the same if you just had a colony. Like if you just had a colony, it's not the same. Brother Carter says, think about this. It took European languages to connect different African nations, or Arab languages connect different African nations. Yeah, a lot of times, a lot of like it's difficult, but a lot of what we see in Africa is really like again, after decolonization, you inherit a whole different system. You know what I mean? It's no longer like you no longer have separate villages. You have these big major trading cities, right? Like that's what you have. You have these big major trading cities. That's what colonialism created. Like a lot of times you'll notice that a lot of these the capitals of these countries are port cities. Tanzania technically has its capital in Dodoma, but it just moved. Like it really just moved, like within the last few months, like maybe last month. So for a long time, like the parliament of Tanzania was actually in Dar es Salaam, for good reason too. And it's the same with happening in America. Like once upon a time, the capital of America was in New York, and they just moved it further inland so that it's not susceptible to invasion anymore. That was it. But anyway, so there would be no income to tax if the laboring population did not work. And again, a lot of the population is not working, and that's the thing that Walter Rodney is not really getting. So in Nigeria, a lot of the population is not working, but a lot of the wealth of the government comes from oil revenues. But most of the population is not involved in oil production, right? So the income given to civil servants, professionals, merchants, etc., come from the store of wealth produced by the community. Quite apart from the injustice in the distribution of wealth, one has to dismiss the argument that the taxpayers' money is what develops a country. In pursuing the goal of development, one must start with the producers and move on from there to see whether the products of their labor are being rationally utilized to bring greater independence and well-being to the nation. So again, it is an unfortunate situation. But like I want people to really grasp this. Like you go to the Nigerian example. Again, I've never been to Nigeria, right? Most of us haven't, right? But you go to the Nigerian example and you have to realize, look, if we go by who is producing the wealth per se, right? It's not going to be Lagos per se, although Lagos is where the capital is. It's going to be whatever foreigner is coming in and building what's his face? Building oil refinery and exploiting the people who are there, okay, who are working in oil. Now, you're not going to pay the people working in oil that much money, otherwise they're not going to work in oil, Okay, so you could say that's a clear example of exploitation, sure. But the point being, you're not going to pay them because, oil production or whatever, right? But the people who would get the money is the government in order to allow these foreigners to exploit the people there, right? Which is bad. It's bad. But outside of those oil producing individuals, most of the Nigerians are not producing anything for the government. So the government is not producing anything. Most of the Nigerians are not producing anything. The people that are producing something are the foreigners and the people being exploited by the foreigners. Right? And so in that sort of system, like, that's where it really becomes complicated, because what Walter Rodney and the socialists are trying to convince you is that, oh no, the majority of the population is producing this oil wealth. The majority of the population is not even touching oil. Like, not even nowhere near oil. If you're living in Lagos or you're living inside of, you're nowhere near oil. You get what I'm saying? You're nowhere. But the government is being financed by this oil system. And that's where things become complicated, right? So anyway, so quite apart from the injustice of the distribution of wealth, once to dismiss the argument, so on and so forth. So it's sad, but it's not, like, it's not, this is not accurate, but there's a reason for it. And it's sad, but it's not, and obviously you'd want something to change about that, but you can't really, you can't really make the statements that he's making. So anyway, so by paying attention to the wealth created by human labor out of nature, one can immediately appreciate that very few underdeveloped countries are lacking in the natural resources, which could go into making a better life. And that's the thing. Natural resources don't make your life better. I just want people to get that too. And in those cases, it's usually possible for 2 or 3 territories to combine together for their mutual benefit. In fact, it can be shown that the undeveloped countries are the ones with the greatest wealth of natural resources, yet the poorest in terms of goods and services presently provided by or for their citizens. The United Nations Survey of Economic Conditions in Africa up to 1964 had this to say about the continent's natural resources. Actually, African potential is shown to be greater every day with new discoveries of mineral wealth. On the agricultural side, African soil is not as rich as the picture of tropical forests might lead one to believe, but there are other climatic advantages so that with proper irrigation, crops can be grown all year round in most parts of the continent. The situation is that Africa has not yet come anywhere close to making the most of its natural wealth, and much of the wealth now being produced is not being retained within Africa for the benefit of Africans. Zambia and Congo produce vast quantities of copper, but that is for the benefit of Europe, North America, and Japan. Even the goods and services which are produced inside of Africa and which remain in Africa nevertheless fall in the hands of non-Africans. Thus, South Africa boasts of having the highest per capita income in Africa, but as an indication of how this is shared out, one should note that while the apartheid regime assures that only 24 white babies die out of every 1,000 live births, they are quite happy to allow 128 African babies to die out of every 1,000 live births. In order to understand present economic conditions in Africa, one needs to know why it is that Africa has realized so little of its natural potential, and one also has to need to know why so much of its present wealth goes to non-Africans who reside for the most part outside of the continent. In a way, underdevelopment is a paradox. Many parts of the world that are naturally rich are actually poor, and parts that are not so well off in wealth of soil and subsoil are enjoying the highest standards of living. And this is the misconception too. America is actually very resource rich. A lot of people don't realize that, but America is actually very resource rich, and America is also huge. I think it probably by land might be bigger than every African country, and by population it's also bigger than every African country, because it's 300 million or 350 million people, as opposed to Nigeria, which is the largest African country, which is 200 million. Right? But anyway, so when the capitalists from the developed parts of the world try to explain this paradox, they often make it sound as though there is something God-given about the situation. One bourgeois economist in a book on development accepted that the comparative statistics of the world today show a gap that is much larger than it was before. By his own admission, the gap between the developed and the undeveloped countries have increased by at least 15 to 20 times over the last 150 years. However, the bourgeois economist in question does not give a historical explanation, nor does he consider that there is a relationship of exploitation which allowed capitalist parasites to grow fat and impoverish the dependencies. Instead, he puts forward a biblical explanation. He says that it is all told in the Bible, for unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. The story of the have-nots is the story of the modern undeveloped countries. I don't know what he's saying, but all right. Presumably, the only comment which one can make on that is amen. The interpretation is that the interpretation that a development is somehow ordained by God is emphasized because of the racist trend in the European scholarship. It is in line with the racist, and again, Europeans should be racist. They should be. Like, why should they be on your side? Is the big question. I'm trying to wrap this up though. So, how long have I been talking? That's the only problem with reading books is that occasionally it's actually pretty long. Let me see how long this live stream has been so far. Damn, okay. I've been standing. I need to sit down. I ain't gonna hold you guys. It's actually pretty hard to stand this long. Wait, let's go back to the reading. I'm using a new setup, by the way. It is in line with the racist prejudice to say openly or to imply that their countries are more developed because their people are innately superior, and that the responsibility for the economic backwardness of Africa lies in the generic backwardness of the race of black Africans. An even bigger problem is that the people of Africa and other parts of the colonized world have gone through a cultural and psychological crisis and have accepted at least partially the European version of things. And it's him. There's not enough doctors here. There ain't enough lawyers. Man, I ain't seen enough country stars. What are you fucking talking about? Not enough country stars, not enough opera houses. Like, yeah, okay. You're probably mistaken on what country you think this is. But anyway, cultural and psychological crisis and have accepted at least partially the European version of things. That means that the African himself has doubts about his capacity to transform and develop his natural environment. With such doubts, he even challenges those of his brothers who say that Africa can and will develop through the efforts of his own people. If we can, and that's what I'm saying, that's a good thing to say. If we can determine when undevelopment came about, it would dismiss the lingering suspicions that it is racially or otherwise predetermined and that we can do little about it. When the experts from capitalist countries do not give a racist explanation, they nevertheless confuse the issue by giving as causes of development the things which really are consequences. For example, they would argue that Africa is in a state of backwardness as a result of a lacking skilled personnel to develop. It is true that because of lack of engineers, Africa cannot on its own build more roads, bridges, and hydroelectric stations. But that is not a cause of underdevelopment, except in the sense that causes and effect come together and reinforce each other. The fact of the matter is that the most profound reasons for the economic backwardness of a given African nation are not to be found outside that nation. The fact of the matter is that the most profound reasons for the economic backwardness of a given African nation are not to be found outside the nation. All that we can find inside are the symptoms of underdevelopment and the secondary factors that make for poverty. I really should sit down though. My feet are hurting. Mistaken interpretations of the cause of underdevelopment usually stem either from the prejudiced thinking or from the error of believing that one can learn the answers by looking inside the underdeveloped economy. The true explanation lies in seeking out the relationship between Africa and certain developed countries and in recognizing that it is a relationship of exploitation, right? Obviously. Man has always exploited this natural environment in order to make a living. At a certain point in time, there also arose the exploitation of man by man, and that a few people grew rich and lived well through the labor of others. They say, I don't think this is exploitation. I think that's just, it could be exploitation. Like, again, in the situation of chattel slavery, obviously exploitation, right? But in the situation of, hey, look, I'm, like for instance, I teach you or something, right? That's not exploitation. Or I guide you. That's not exploitation. I invest in you. That's not exploitation, right? So anyway, so then a stage was reached by which people in one community called the nation exploited the natural resources and the labor of another nation and its people. Since underdevelopment deals with the comparative economics of nations, it is the last kind of exploitation that is of greatest interest here, i.e. the exploitation of nation by nation. One of the common means by which one nation exploits another and one that is relevant to Africa's external relationships is exploitation through trade. When the terms, and so that's what I'm saying, trade, okay. Now, trade is generally supposed to be mutually advantageous, right? Mutually beneficial. When the terms of trade are set by one country in a manner entirely advantageous to itself, then the trade is usually detrimental to the trading partner. To be specific, one can take the export of agricultural produce from Africa and the import of manufactured goods into the Africa from Europe, North America, and Japan. The big nations establish the price of the agricultural products and subject these prices to frequent reductions. At the same time, the price of manufactured goods is also set by them, along with the freight rates necessary to trade in the ships of those nations. The minerals of Africa also fall into the same category as agricultural produce as far as pricing is concerned. The whole import-export relationship between Africa and its trading partners is one of unequal exchange and of exploitation. So again, it's true and false. It's true, hey, you know what? They can set the prices. It's false in the sense of it's inherently exploitative in the sense of, well, if you wanted those resources, don't give them. Like, if you wanted that food, don't give it. But if you're trading with somebody, obviously when you trade with somebody, you try to get the better price if you really want whatever they're selling. And that's the thing. It's like if you want the Ford, you know, if you want the 10,000 cars, right, or the 5,000 cars, you want those 5,000 cars. Well, what are you willing to give for it? And they're supposed to lowball you. You know, they're supposed to lowball you. And like if you, like I said, like if you engage in any informal economy, right, people are going to lowball you. You know, people are going to lowball you. I could tell you that. I don't want to talk about that experience, but basically, like, yeah, people will lowball you, and that's like that. Like, is it exploitation, or is it you have bad negotiation skills and a bad ability at negotiating, right? Or your leaders are stupid at negotiating. And one of the things that a lot of people realize is that a lot of African leaders are not good at negotiating. You know, in fact, the first article I ever wrote was about that. I was talking about London Jeffries said that we might win the war, but we lose at the negotiation table. You know, and it's like, yeah, that's a phenomenon in and of itself. So he says, more far-reaching than just trade is the actual ownership of the means of production in one country by the citizens of another. When citizens of Europe own the land and the mines of Africa, this is the most direct way of sucking the African continent. Under colonialism, the ownership was complete and backed by military domination. Today, in many African countries, the foreign ownership is still present, although the armies and flags of foreign powers has been removed. So long as foreigners own land, mines, factories, banks, insurance companies, means of production, newspapers, power stations, etc., then for so long will the wealth of African flow outwards into the hands of those elements. In other words, in the absence of direct political control, foreign investment ensures that the natural resources and labor of Africa produce economic value, which is at a loss to the continent. So again, in a sense, you know, because the thing we have to realize is this. Let's say you have this big cobalt mine in Africa, right? Because there's a cobalt mine in Africa, does that necessarily mean that people in Africa were mining cobalt just for the heck of it? No. You know, does it mean that there were people in Africa who were using that cobalt? Not at all, right? So if some foreigner says, hey, you know what, I'm interested in getting this cobalt. Like I'll give you guys an example, in fact. I think we saw it on the Bit of Medicine podcast, so make sure you guys check out Shoot the Breeze. But on the Bit of Medicine podcast, there was this white boy who was looking for a strain of marijuana that wasn't in Europe already. And eventually they came to, they found that strain of marijuana somewhere deep in like some country. I don't know what country, but let's just say it's like Burkina Faso or something. Like somewhere deep in Burkina Faso, there's just this field of marijuana plants that is pretty much going untouched. Like occasionally some of the villagers might go and take some, but generally speaking, nobody was really messing with this field of marijuana, right? And so they paid this guy for the guys paid the Burkina Faso people for for a 1 leaf or something like that, you know. But the whole thing is, and then of course they reproduced the strain inside of Denmark or whatever, right? Actually, one of the guys died from it, but like one of the guys died in Africa or some shit. But the point being that that's what the cobalt mine would have been. It's been like, oh look, there's some mine out here, but realistically we're not using it. You know what I mean? So it's like, what is the economic value that's flowing outward if you're not using superconductors as yet? You know, and that's the big question that a lot of us don't really like we don't really grasp. We just kind of say, well, shit, you know, we got all these cobalt, we should be rich. You're only going to be rich from cobalt if you're using cobalt or if you're trading cobalt. And if you're trading cobalt and you don't use it, you're not going to get a good price for it. You know, like you're not going to get a good price for it because it's dirt to you. It's dirt. And I remember one of these brothers, one of his brothers was telling me, I was like, hey, so what should we do if you find cobalt, so on and so forth? And he said, leave it alone. And so that was actually a smart decision, right? But the reality is that it's not going to generate you any wealth if you just leave it alone. So like, how are you losing wealth is the big question, right? So anyway, foreign investments often take the form of loans to African governments. Naturally, these loans have to be repaid. In the 1960s, the rate of repayment, amortization on official loans in undeveloped countries rose from $400 million per year to about $700 million per year, and it's constantly on the increase. Besides, there's an interest to be paid on the loans as well as profits which come from the direct investment in the economy. These two sources accounted for the fact that over $500 million flowed outwards from the undeveloped countries in 1965. So again, these are some bad negotiating deals, but like, again, you're supposed to lowball. If you're trying to make money, you're supposed to lowball. That's it. In fact, I'll tell you guys this. There's this streamer. He does video games. He plays video games, and occasionally I would like watch it. Because I'm a video game developer. Or at least I say I am, right? So he plays indie games and all that kind of stuff. One indie game genre he likes is called merchant games, and so he was showing us a merchant game. And like the whole idea of a merchant game was that anytime somebody gave you an offer for a good, you would counter offer to make a profit. You would basically barter with everything. And like we already did in Africa, barter. Or we brag about how we used to barter, right? These African politicians are bartering with Europeans and they're fucking losing. Okay, they're losing at the bartering. But it is what it is. In fact, when I was in Africa, matter of fact, I was looking for, like I said, I had to buy a place to rent. When I was buying this place to rent, there was an official price, and I bartered to make the price less. You know what I mean? Like to lessen the price on me. Now the guy still got his money, but if you walk away and say, "Oh, well, Oni, you exploited him," no, because obviously he was already overcharging me anyway. But the point being, if you agreed to it, it's not really exploitation. If you volunteered for it, it's not really exploitation. It's one thing when there's a military presence. It's another thing when there's not a military presence and you go for the same deal. Like that's when you're just kind of being stupid. Like if you agree to something under duress, that's one thing. If you agree to something voluntarily, it's not really exploitation, right? So the information on these matters is seldom complete for the obvious reason that those making the profit are trying to keep things quiet. So the figures given above are likely to be underestimates. They are meant to give some idea of the extent to which the wealth of the Africa are being drained off by those who invest in it, and thereby own a large part of the means of production of wealth in Africa. Furthermore, in most recent times, the forms of investment has become more subtle and more dangerous. They include so-called absentee management of the local African companies by international capitalist experts. Africa trades mainly with the countries of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Africa is also diversifying its trade by dealing with socialist countries, and if the trade proves disadvantageous to the African economy, then they developed socialist countries will also have joined the ranks of the exploitators of Africa. See, he's like, if you're not advantaging us in a trade, then you're an exploiter. Like, no. Anyway, how it is very essential at this stage to draw a clear distinction between the capitalist countries and the socialist ones, because socialist countries have never at any time owned any part of the African continent, nor do they invest in African economies in such a way as to expatriate profits from Africa. Therefore, socialist countries are not involved in the robbery of Africa. Most of the people who write about the undeveloped who are read in the continents of Africa, Asia, and Latin America are spokesmen for the capitalist or bourgeois world. They seek to justify capitalist exploitation both inside and outside their own countries. One of the things which they do is confuse the issue, is to place all undeveloped countries in one camp and all developed countries in another camp, irrespective of different social systems, so that the term capitalist and socialist never enters in discussion. Instead, one is faced with a simple division between the industrialized nations and those which are not industrialized. It is true that both the USA and the Soviet Union are industrialized, and it is true that when one looks at the statistics, countries such as France, Norway, Czechoslovakia, and Romania are much closer together than any of them to an African country. But it's absolutely necessary to determine whether the standard of living in a given industrialized country is a product of its own internal resources or whether it stems from exploiting other countries. The United States has a small proportion of the world's population and exploitable natural wealth, but it enjoys a huge percentage of the wealth which comes from exploiting the labor and natural resources of the whole world. The erroneous views about underdevelopment and oversimplified distinction between rich and poor nations are opposed by socialist scholars both inside and outside the socialist country. Those erroneous views are also being exposed by economists in underdeveloped countries who are discovering that the explanation offered by the bourgeois scholars are explanations which suit the interests of those countries which exploit the rest of the world through trade and investment. One French socialist writer, Pierre Jailly, proposes that to obtain a proper perspective of relations between developed countries and undeveloped ones, two categories should be set up, namely imperialists and socialists. Socialist camp include all countries, big and small, which have decided to break away from the international capitalism. The imperialist camp contains not only the capitalist giants like the USA, France, West Germany, and Japan, but also the weak nations in which those industrialist nations have investments. Therefore, the imperialist camp can be subdivided into exploiting and exploited countries. For the most part, the nations of Africa fall into the group of exploited countries inside of the capitalist imperialist system. Roughly 1/3 of the world's people are already living under some form of socialism. The other 2/3 constitute the capitalist imperialist camp, with the majority being the exploited section. So this is pretty interesting. Brother Bakari might not like this, but Walter Rodney is basically saying, hey, you know what? The socialist countries are not the imperialist countries, and so he's like, hey, this one and so forth. Let's see. Oh, Cassandra Cheek is here. She says Jumbo family, but Africa is the richest country, though. Yeah, like in material wealth, like Africa has a lot of material wealth, and continent, right? Yeah. As a continent, Africa has a lot of material wealth. A lot of countries don't, but like namely DRC does. But like everybody, like if you're going to talk about exploitation in Africa, like you should just say DRC. And I think that's one of the things that like really attracted me to Pan-Africanism was I think somebody who was from the DRC was basically saying, Africa is the heart of, Congo is the heart of Africa. And like where the Congo goes is where Africa goes. And like realistically, we should really be focusing our energies on how to improve the Congo or get it out of its exploitative system, but we don't. All right, so it is interesting to notice that in spite of their efforts to confuse the situation, the bourgeois writers often touch on the truth. For example, the United Nations, which is dominated by Western capitalist powers, would never stress the exploitation by capitalist nations, but their economic review refer on the one hand to the centrally planned economies, which means that socialist countries, and on the other hand, they speak of the market economies, which means, in effect, the imperialist sectors of the world. The latter is subdivided into the developed market economies and the developing market economies, disguising the fact that the market means capitalist market. This study is concerned with analyzing the relations between these countries, which are together within the capitalist market system. Now, obviously, everybody knows, like, why is he saying they're disguising it when they're literally the capitalist? Like, I don't know. In 1970, Cold War, I think it was clear that they were talking about capitalist versus socialist. I don't know why he's making it seem like they were disguising it and hiding it. So the things which brings Africa to the capitalist market system are trade, colonial domination, and capitalist investment. Trade has existed for several centuries, it's trade, yeah. Has several centuries. Colonial rule began in the late 19th century and had almost disappeared, and the investment in the African economy has been increasing steadily in the present century. Throughout the period that Africa has participated in the capitalist economy, two factors have brought about underdevelopment. In the first place, the wealth created by African labor and from African resources was grabbed by the capitalist countries of Europe. And in the second place, restrictions were placed upon African capacity to make the maximum use of its economic potential, which is what development is all about. These two processes present the answer to the two questions raised above as to why Africa has realized so little of its potential and why so much of its present wealth goes outside of the continent. African economies are integrated into the very structure of the developed capitalist economies, and they are integrated in a manner that is unfavorable to Africa and ensures that Africa is dependent on the big capitalist countries. Indeed, structural dependence is one of the characteristics of underdevelopment. Most progressive writers divide the capitalist imperialist system into two parts. The first is the dominant or metropolitan section, and the countries in the second group are often called satellites because they are in the orbit of the metropolitan economies. The same idea is conveyed by simply saying that the undeveloped countries are dependencies of the metropolitan capitalist economies. When a child or the young of any animal species ceases to be dependent upon its mother for food and production, it can be said to have developed into the direction of maturity. Dependent nations can never be considered developed. It is true that modern conditions force all countries to be mutually independent in order to satisfy the needs of their citizens, but that is not compatible with the economic independence, because economic independence does not mean isolation. It does, however, require a capacity to exercise choice in external relations, and above all, it requires that a nation's growth at some point must become self-reliant and self-sustaining. Such things are obviously in direct contradiction to the economic dependence of numerous countries on the metropoles of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. So, again, he's talking about independence and interdependence and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is this, the capacity of exercise choice in external relations, like that does exist in Africa. The only thing is that the people giving the best choices are unfortunately, or at least nominally the best choices, are unfortunately the Westerners, or the people who are attracting the African leadership are the Westerners. And we see this in the West too. Like we see this in American governments, American jurisprudence. You have politicians who have been in power, like Nancy Pelosi, for instance, who's been in power for 50 years or something like that. And she's been attracted by the local bourgeoisie, if you will, or the American bourgeoisie or international capital to, promote whatever interest is in their interest. And so that same international capital does the same thing they do with Nancy Pelosi to, whomever in Africa, right? And because they do the same thing, we say, oh no, it's exploitation, instead of, well, that's like people with money want more money. That's what it is. People with money want more money, and yeah, that's really what it is. And it's not a question of dependence and freedom of choice. It's more a question of, well, how does somebody with money make more money? Like I said, if I want to buy a restaurant, it's because I want to get more money. It is also true that metropoles are dependent on the wealth of exploited. Wait, did I read that other part? External relations. Such things are obviously direct contradictions to the economic dependence of numerous countries on the metropoles of Western Europe, North America, and Japan. It's also true that metropoles are dependent on the wealth of the exploited portions of the world. This is a source of their strength and a potential weakness within the capitalist imperialist system. Since the peasants and workers of the dependencies are awakening to a realization that it is possible to cut the tentacles which imperialism has extended into their countries. However, there's a substantial difference between the dependence of the metropoles on the colonies and the subjugation of the colonies under a foreign capitalist yoke. I can't tell if I'm reading too fast. But anyway, I don't know if I'm reading fast or not, because I imagine somebody's probably playing this on 2 times the speed and they're like, what is he saying? So the capitalist countries are technologically more advanced and are therefore the sector of the imperialist system which determine the direction of change. A striking example of this effect is the fact that the synthetic fabric manufactured in the capitalist metropoles have begun to replace fabrics made from raw materials grown in the colonies. In other words, within certain limits, it is the technologically advanced metropoles who can decide when to end their dependence on the colonies in a particular sphere. When that happens, it is the colony or neo-colony which goes begging cap in hand for a reprieve and a new quota. It is for this reason that a formerly colonized nation has no hope of developing until it breaks effectively with a vicious circle of dependence and exploitation which characterizes imperialism. So I don't disagree with this. I think that if you are dependent on somebody else, then obviously they can affect your economy. Like if you're economically dependent on somebody else, they'll obviously affect your economy. And so, but like what we have to do is that's why I follow the school of Garveyism. And basically what Garveyism basically means is improve your, make the rest of Africa your trading partners. Now, whether you can or can't is another question. Because like you said, who's gonna buy your clothes? Who's gonna buy your fabrics? In Africa, you know what I'm saying? The only people who want to buy your fabrics is Europe, and then Europe says, you know what, we could actually make our own fabrics. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, we have to actually produce things that people actually use. And one of the things that I noticed was that we use phones and we use cars, right? But it is what it is, right? So anyway, so at the social and cultural level, there are many features which aid in keeping undeveloped countries integrated into the capitalist system and at the same time hanging on to the apron strings of the metropoles. The Christian church has always been a major instrument for cultural penetration and cultural dominance, in spite of the fact that in many instances, Africans sought to set up independent churches. Equally important has been the role of education in producing Africans to service the capitalist system and to subscribe to its values. Recently, the imperialists have been using new universities in Africa to keep themselves entrenched at the highest economic level. And again, you're like, hey, why are the imperialists doing all this stuff? Like, what if they don't give a church, if they don't give a school, if they don't give a university, you're mad. If they make a church, if they make a school, if they make a university, but they say you can't come inside, you're mad. And now if they make a church and they make a school, they make a university, and they allow you inside, you're still mad. And it's like, what? You want them to build the curriculum or build the curriculum that suits your uplift? Why would they do that? That's the big question. But anyway, so you see, something as basic as language has come to serve as one of the mechanisms of integration and dependence. I thought I was closer to the ending. Mechanism of integration and dependence. So it might actually be a few more pages. Fuck. Anyway, the French and the English that is so widely used in Africa is more so the purpose of African communicating with the exploiters rather than Africans with Africans. So something as basic as language has come. So this is what Brother Bakari was talking about earlier about the language. Something as basic as language has come to serve as one of the mechanisms of integration and dependence. The French and English that is so widely used in Africa is more for the purpose of Africans communicating with exploiters rather than African with African. Actually, it would be difficult to find a sphere which did not reflect the economic dependence and structural integration. At a glance, nothing could be less harmful and more entertaining than music, and yet this too is used as a weapon of cultural domination. The American imperialists go so far as to take folk music, jazz, and soul music of oppressed black people and transform this into American propaganda over the voice of America beamed at Africa. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down now. It's my legs are tired. I can't even. I'm losing my health. Usually you shouldn't podcast while sitting down, but my legs are not. I'm no longer a spring chicken. All right, so during the colonial period, the forms of political subordination in Africa were obvious. So you probably could tell I even sound different sitting down. But during the colonial period, the forms of political subordination in Africa were obvious. There were governors, colonial officials, and police. In politically independent African states, the metropolitan capitalists have to ensure favorable political decisions by remote control. So they set up these political puppets in many parts of Africa, who shamelessly agree to compromise with the vicious apartheid regime of South Africa when their masters tell them to do so. The African revolutionary Frantz Fanon dealt scorchingly and at length with the question of the minority in Africa, which serves as the transmission line between the metropolitan capitalists and the dependencies in Africa. So I did read also Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, which was something I was supposed to read a long time ago, so I'm glad I read it. But anyway, so the importance of this group cannot be underestimated. The presence of a group of African sellouts is part of the definition of underdevelopment. Any diagnosis of underdevelopment in Africa will reveal not just low per capita income and protein deficiencies, but also the gentlemen who dance in Abidjan, Accra, and Kinshasa when music is played in Paris, London, and New York. But also the gentlemen who dance in Accra when music is played in Paris. Okay. All right. So political instability is manifesting itself in Africa as a chronic symptom of the underdevelopment of political life within the imperialist context. Military coups have followed one after the other, usually meaning nothing to the masses of the people and something representing a reactionary reversal of the efforts at national liberation. This trend was well exemplified in Latin American history, so that its appearance is in neocolonial South Vietnam or in neocolonial Africa is not at all surprising. If economic power is centered outside of national African boundaries, then political and military powers, in any real sense, is also centered outside until and unless the masses of peasants and workers are mobilized to offer an alternative to the system of sham political independence. So again, this is like, again, you can't keep going back to socialism because you're going to confuse people. The masses of peasants and workers are not going to do shit. They're not going to do anything. And because they're not going to do anything, or because it's so unlikely and so improbable, or even say it this way, he writes this in 1974, this doesn't happen. This just doesn't happen in the next 50 years. So if you read this book 50 years ago, or you read this book anytime between now and 50 years ago, you wasted your time. In fact, I'm wasting my time. Well, I'm not saying it was a waste of time, but what I mean is that as a theoretical base, you wasted your time because this is not happening. And because of that, like you can't be so absolutist. You could say, hey, some people reason this. But when you say, unless the masses of peasants do this, you're not going to, like, if you're focusing on this, you're not focusing on the real solution, is what I'm saying. Anyway, so all those features are ramifications of underdevelopment and exploitation of the imperialist system. In most analysis of the question, they are either left out entirely or the whole concept of imperialism and neocolonialism is dismissed as mere rhetoric, especially by academics who claim to be removed from politics. During the remainder of the study, a great deal of detail will be presented to indicate the grim reality behind the so-called slogans of capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, neocolonialism, and the like. For the present moment, the position to be adopted can be stated briefly in the following terms. The question as to who and what is responsible for African development can be answered at two levels. Firstly, the answer is that the operation, so this is important, who's responsible? Firstly, the answer is that the operation of the imperialist system bears major responsibility for African economic retardation by draining African wealth and by making it impossible to develop more rapidly the resources of the continent. Secondly, one has to deal with those who manipulate the system and those who are either agents or unwitting accomplices in the said system. The capitalists of Western Europe were the ones who actively extended their exploitation from inside Europe to cover the whole of Africa. In recent times, they were joined and some extent replaced by capitalists from the United States, and for many years now, even the workers of those metropolitan countries have benefited from the exploitation and development of Africa. None of these remarks are intended to remove the ultimate responsibility for development from the shoulders of Africans, okay? I like that. None of these remarks, I have a yellow highlighter here, let's see if that works. None of these remarks are intended to remove the ultimate responsibility for development from the shoulders of Africans, right? Oh, that's cool. Not only are there African accomplices inside the imperialist system, but every African has a responsibility to understand the system and work for its overthrow. So again, that's okay. I wouldn't put the burden on every African, although it's all right. Brief guide to reading. There is a great deal of literature on development and undevelopment, although less than one would expect in view of the importance of the subject, most of which are available seeks to justify capitalism. Hence, there is a narrow concentration on economic development, and particularly on capitalist economies, rather than any analysis of human social development. That approach is challenged by Marxist writers in the metropoles and increasingly by scholars from the undeveloped world. So, why don't you guys read Frederick Engels, Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, Karl Marx. So, Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, Karl Marx, Preface to the Contribution and the Critique of Political Economy, and Karl Marx, Pre-Capitalist Economy's Formation, edited by Husband. These three works are samples of writings by the founders of what is now called Marxism. Most of the publications of Marx and Engels have relevance to the theme of development, with particular emphasis on feudal and capitalist times. So then you have Richard T. Gill's Economic Development, Past and Present, and Ragnar Nurk's Problems of Capital Formation in Undeveloped Countries. These are typical examples of bourgeois metropolitan views on development and undevelopment, the first being a text for North American college students by a Canadian economist, and the second being a frequently reprinted work of one of the most prominent bourgeois advocates of the vicious cycle of poverty theory. Unfortunately, there is also the kind of books which dominates the shelves of any university or public library in Africa. The reader is invited to test this generalization. J.D. Bernal, Science and History, Joseph Needham, Science and Civilization in China. Both of these are lengthy, but they should be tackled. Science and technology derived from the effort to understand and control the natural environment. Familiarity with the history of science is essential to an awareness of the development of society. Needham's book is cited here as a corrective for the fairly common view that science is something peculiarly European. So they're talking about science in China. And so, but again, what view that science is peculiarly European? Anyway, so Celso Furtado, Development and Undevelopment, A. Gundar Frank, Capitalism and Undevelopment in Latin America, and T. Sensei, The Political Economy of Underdevelopment. So what's interesting is that I never heard of these authors, but they are probably just as big, if not as big, as How Europe Undeveloped Africa, but we never heard of them because, again, there's always a historical bias there's always a subjectivity inside of historicity. So the first writer is from Brazil, a country with a long history of dependence and on and exploitation by the metropoles of Europe and North America. Frank's books reflects the second book. Frank's book reflects the thinking of many progressive Latin American intellectuals and has now become well entrenched as a view of Marxists inside the metropoles. Sensei is a Hungarian economist systematically applying Marxist insight to the actual data and process of the undeveloped world and imperialism as a whole. Now you see how many books he's recommending? Now, granted, if you were just focused on underdevelopment, I would recommend, you read a couple of books on the subject. But this is the trouble with us as a people, is that we tend to just get buried in books. When you get buried in books, that's not a good idea. Now, granted, I think I'm going to recommend people read more. So, it is what it is. But anyway, Samir Amin, The Class Struggle in Africa. Samir Amin is North African. He stands out with regards to both the volume of his production and the quality of his insight. The text cited above is very general, covering and outlining the period of the coups of development in ancient Africa right up to the present and the projected socialist future. It is likely that more of his work will be translated into English, French being his working language. So that's it. Anyway, so that's chapter 1. Whew! That was big. Hopefully you guys like that. I see we actually had a couple of people come through, which I'm appreciative of. And beyond that, though, I think that was that's actually my time. So appreciation to the chat. Let me just shout out everybody who was here. Kofi, Kofi's always here, so that's pretty cool. Appreciation to Kofi for that. Bitter Medicine Podcast. Make sure you guys check out Bitter Medicine Podcast. Forecast Radio showed up. Forecast Radio is another good brother. You guys make sure. He's actually teaching African American history, but not just African American really, but like history in general. He might become a professor at one of these HBCUs one day, so you guys look out for him. Ish Kepri. I haven't really seen Ish Kepri too much, but appreciation for coming through. Omalone's a legend in the UK. Is a legend. We go back about 10 years, so appreciation for him for coming through. He's not usually around, but he's here. Brother Bakari, obviously my brother from another mother. You guys know. And see, I might come from Tethers. He comes from Feathers, right? I'll just mention. But make sure you guys check out his podcast too. And of course, Cassandra Cheek showed up. She's an awesome sister. She was traveling around East Africa recently with her husband. She's a powerful sister. So make sure you guys check out her as well. But other than that, I appreciate everybody for coming through. Thank you for joining me. I think I'm going to continue with this next week and next week and next week. And then maybe, we'll see. Because I think one of the things about these podcasts for me is that I think I should benefit too. Like I said, you always got to go look out for mutual benefit. So one of the benefits I have from this experience is that I get to finally read this book. People talk about this book so much. I actually quoted it a couple of times, but I didn't get to read it. And I didn't get to the part where I wanted to. But, so far it was all right. I mean, it's better than the stupid dribble that you might see on social media. So anyway, outside of that, thank you so much, everybody, for coming through. You guys could share. You guys could subscribe. If you want to check out my book, you can check out my book. It's a cool book, The Book of Power. You can't do what I did to that book. It's pretty ironclad. But other than that, Shemin Hotep, Anku Ja Seneb Neb, Amin Ma'at Dua Necher.